Chapter 231. The green leaves drifted down from the branches and slowly landed on the expensive wool carpet without making any sound. Lu Chenjia looked at the beautiful patterns on the wool carpet quietly. She looked at the lonely green leaf in the middle of the pattern. No one knew what she was thinking. After a long silence, she said softly, "My feelings for him are as natural as the orchids in the valley. Why did I mention it? Do I want to prove something?" Mo Shanshan answered directly. He said that this is a public display of affection and a sign of lack of confidence. I don't know what it means to show off. I don't know why he said that, and I don't know what you want to prove either. But I know that orchids growing in the valley is natural. When you moved the flower in front of me and carefully cut it, it was no longer natural. She did not say anything else. She did not bid farewell and turned to walk out of the screen. Lu Chenjia stood up. Her eyes that were as clear as autumn water showed a faint dimness. She looked at her back and said, "The hot tea you wanted has not been served. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? That is the intoxicating grass that I specially brought from Peach Mountain. I remember that you liked it the most back then." Mo Shanshan stopped in her tracks. She did not turn back and replied calmly, "Compared to a cup of tea, I actually hope to see you in the camp under the meadow. Then you could treat me to a cup of plain water." Lu Chenjia's hand that was holding the small scissors turned pale. She said softly, "At the beginning, I did not know that you were in the camp. I also did not think that the horse gang could threaten you. If you were really in danger, do you think that I would still sit quietly in the carriage and ignore you?" Mo Shanshan reached out and held the side of the screen. She said, "I have said that this is not about you and me. It is about the world. You can ignore the external feelings of joy and sorrow, but I cannot and do not want to be that kind of person." The screen slid open, and the girl in white with an indifferent expression slowly walked out. The disciples of Black Ink Garden who were drinking tea outside and had nothing to do all stood up to welcome her. The students of Revelation Institute on the opposite side also stood up. Mo Shanshan looked at Zhuo Zhihua and nodded gently. Her peers then knew that the Hill Master was not polite to the flower addict during the conversation inside the room. Suddenly, their chests were filled with joy. Ignoring the enthusiasm of the Revelation Institute's students to ask them to stay, and not even bothering to say a word, the disciples of Black Ink Garden proudly walked out of the magnificent tent with their heads held high. Outside the tent, the blue sky was high and far. There was not a single cloud. The girl in white squinted her eyes and looked at the sky. She thought about how Lu Chenjia had finally lowered her head and lost her arrogance. She could not help but feel relieved. Only then did she understand that this was bullying. Only then did she understand that the so-called revenge was not limited to words or fists. Thinking of this, she looked back at Ning Ke, who was standing quietly in the group of girls. She thought to herself, as a disciple of the Academy of the Tang Empire, he should be generous, but why is he so meticulous? The girls of the Great River Kingdom returned to their own campsite and could no longer suppress their curiosity. They began to ask the Hill Master what she had said to the flower addict. The tent was filled with chatter and bustle. Even Ning Ke looked toward her. After a moment of silence, Mo Shanshan repeated the previous conversation. "The joys and sorrows of the world have nothing to do with her? Does senior brother's death under the meadow have nothing to do with her? It seems that we, the people of the world, are not even comparable to a flower in the eyes of the princess." Cat Girl held the box and said loudly, unable to suppress her anger, "If this square box was a gift from Black Ink Garden to the Revelation Institute, why did she bring it back? The flower addict princess seems to be quiet and gentle, but her heart is not in the world. This matter has nothing to do with her. The ones who deserve to die are the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the old woman who is standing on the meadow and watching coldly." Zhuo Zhihua shook her head and looked at the box in Cat Girl's arms. She frowned and asked curiously, "What is this?" "This is a secret weapon. Yesterday, senior brother Zhong and I spent 100 taels of silver to buy it from someone." Cat Girl hugged the box tightly and snorted. She said indignantly, "It's a pity that senior sister Shanshan refused to use it." Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the paper on the table with her right hand. A few strands of hair fell from her ears. She said, "Even though Chenjia didn't say it, I've already taught her a lesson. There's no need to humiliate her further. Ning-Ke could not help but shake his head when he heard this. In a traveling carriage, he had taught the calligraphy addict on the first day. There was an eternal truth that one had to be beaten to death. Asking for justice and bullying was not much different from beating someone up. Since they were going to fall out with each other, of course, they had to humiliate the other party to death. He looked at the calligraphy addict, who was about to start practicing calligraphy again. He suddenly realized that ever since he entered the back of the mountain of the academy, he had been obsessed with cultivation and had forgotten about writing for a long time. Suddenly, he realized something else. Ever since he had combed her hair once in the carriage at the tragic camp, she had maintained this hairstyle. Her black hair was simply tied behind her back, revealing her fair and beautiful face, making her look even more graceful and elegant. Zhujiawa said to the crowd, "The Divine Hall will convene a meeting in the afternoon to discuss the matter of assisting the palace and sending troops against the desolate man next year. Disciples of all sects must attend. Everyone, eat early and don't waste time." The grassland people lived on mutton, and there was no rice in their meals. Even though the palace had shown enough sincerity to the people from the Central Plains, the most expensive and scarce rice would, of course, be given to the Divine Hall and the Tang army first. Therefore, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden still had oily mutton and mutton soup for lunch today. No matter how much they cooked, mutton was still mutton. After leaving the Blue Loin Sea, these girls had almost never eaten anything else. Yesterday, they had eaten too many new things at the Gumumu meeting. At this time, looking at the plate full of mutton, they found it difficult to get sick of it. Only Ning-Ke was still eating carefully. It was said that poor children matured early. So a child who had encountered a rare famine and was tortured to the point of death when he was young would never waste food when he grew up. While chewing slowly, his brain was also working quickly, thinking about other things. The horse gang from the grassland came to kill him, which meant that his identity must have been exposed. But he did not know to what extent and how many people in the palace knew of his existence. The Tang camp in the east was full of the elite cavalry of the northeast border military. What was the relationship between General Shu from Chang and Xiaohou? According to the analysis of His Majesty's secret edict before he left, once he revealed his identity, General Shu's buttocks should be sitting next to his buttocks. Until now, he still did not think that the big black horse was a big possibility of his identity being exposed. It had to be said that the great His Majesty and the handsome old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion had met countless people in their lives, but they had made a big mistake in using Ning Quebec. If he was a general, he would definitely be able to defeat everyone, but if he was to be a gold medal secret agent, he would be quite a failure. After lunch, Ning-Ke wiped his oily mouth and took the slightly heavy square box from Catgirl and held it in his arms. Under the warm winter sun, he walked to the bustling area near the palace. The Gumumu gathered a large number of people. Where there were people, there would naturally be business. The lively grassland was where the merchants gathered. Other than the neighboring tribes selling their goods, there were also a few brave caravans from the Central Plains. Somehow, they managed to follow the Divine Temple's negotiation team to this place. The things in the box in his arms were goods that a merchant from the Yin Kingdom had specially brought to win the favor of the Chanyu princess. Last night, he had paid a high price of 100 taels of silver and even used the name of the flower addict Lu Chenjia to barely buy it, since Mo Shanshan did not want to use it, and he could not bring it back to Chang, and he naturally did not want it to freeze to death in the cold wilderness. So he decided to ask the Yin Kingdom merchant for a refund, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. Even though he was now an invisible tycoon in Chang, and 100 taels of silver was a huge amount. Not to mention that he would not be able to report it to Sang Sang when he returned, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. However, before he reached the place, he was stopped by someone. Hearing the gradually gathering footsteps around him, Ning-Ke could not help but raise his eyebrows as he looked at the cold and arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him. He thought to himself that these people were after all believers of Hao Yin, and they would not be like the gangsters in Chang and West City who would pull out their swords after blocking the street. so he did not move. More than a dozen Revelation Institute students surrounded Ning K in the middle. They seemed to be standing loosely, but in fact, they had blocked all possible escape routes. However, as Ning K expected, these people did not rush up to beat him up. The arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him even bowed politely. The student of the Revelation Institute said, "Senior brother of the Black Ink Garden, could you please meet someone?" Ning K completely believed that if he said it was not convenient, then what was going to happen next would be very inconvenient for the children to see. He was not afraid of anything, but he guessed that the person who could mobilize so many Revelation Institute students to invite him to meet must be that girl. So he smiled and obediently followed them. On a green meadow outside the tent, the princess of Uelloan Kingdom, Luchinjia, sat on a snow-white horse. She raised her hand and signaled for everyone to leave. There were only 2 people and a horse left on the meadow. She looked down at Ning K quietly with a strange expression. After a long time, she said softly, "I have known Shan Shan for many years. Although we have not seen each other for a while, we still write to each other. What is strange is that the calligraphy addict who spoke to me in the tent today seems to have changed into another person." Ning K did not expect the girl on the horse to start asking questions so directly. He could not help but feel that it was a little sudden. He did not even have the time to look closely at what this legendary beauty looked like. Luchinjia did not wait for him to reply and said with a serious gaze, "She said that she learned a lot from someone. I am very curious about who that someone is, so I took the liberty to invite you over to ask." Ning K was slightly stunned and replied sincerely, "I do not know what your highness is talking about." Luchinjia looked up into the distance and did not even look at him. She said, "I also do not know when the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had a male disciple like you. Who are you?" Ning K clenched his fists and swore bitterly in his heart that if His Majesty wanted him to be a spy after returning to Chong, he would not be stupid enough to agree again. He would not hesitate even if it meant that he would die a little later. If it were not for Miss Elon's kindness tonight, I would not have been able to write a single word. I will send you 3,000 yuan for each chapter and make some adjustments. I will send you 5,000 yuan tomorrow. In addition, I will seriously and attentively recommend the new book of the fattest fatty in the Northeast. My classmate Irjen has finally released a new book. After defying the Celestial, he intends to ask for the devil. Everyone, please trample on him. There is no need to give him face. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 232. Looking at the beautiful girl on the white horse, her hair blown by the winter wind, Ning K's heart ached. He knew that the situation he was facing now was a little tricky. He did not have many choices left. He could either defeat her from the horse or reveal his identity as a student of the academy. But should he call himself Zhong Dajuan or something else? The problem was that this girl was one of the 3 addicts in the world. Even though her cultivation state was not as high as the Tao addict and Mo Shan Shan, her cultivation state was at the upper see-through state, which was enough to bully him. As for revealing his identity as a student of the academy, Ning K was still a little hesitant. Luchinjia looked down at him calmly. From her expression, it could be seen that she did not care about his answer at all. She continued, harsh, bitter, and dark. The calligraphy addict I met today disappointed me, because she was originally like me, a rare, pure person in this world. She was one of the few friends I had in this chaotic and disappointing world. So I'm very curious as to who caused such a huge change in her. I know that there are many dark and ugly things in the world that people like you regard as wisdom. I do not understand and do not want to get involved. I also do not want her to get involved. I hope that you will stay away from her in the future. Ning K raised his head to look at the beautiful princess on horseback and replied gently, "Your Highness, I don't think I need your advice on the relationship between me and the Hill Master. And I don't think such advice will be effective. Shan Shan is pure in nature and has not experienced the affairs of the world. When she first comes into contact with your dark tricks, she will probably find it interesting and think that it is the truth. But you must remember that you men are ultimately the dust and dirt of the world. No matter how you try to cover it up with words and actions, You will one day reveal the filth within. Lu Qingjiao looked at him coldly and did not hide her disgust. She said, I just don't want her to be deceived by you. I don't want her to experience disappointment. That is why I came to see you to say these words. Hearing this, Ning Ke was certain of a few things. The legendary anthemaniac princess was not a naive girl who only knew about flowers and plants and hid in her garden. On the contrary, she was very intelligent and sensitive. She could quickly find out the possible reason for Mo Shanshan's change. Moreover, she was a bit of a neat freak both physically and mentally. Thinking of the battle with the horse gang, the cavalryman of Divine Hall on the meadow, the horse carriage in the middle of the cavalryman, and the beautiful girl in front of him was also in the carriage at that time, Ning Ke became more and more confused. Where did her obsession with spiritual cleanliness come from? How did it manifest in her daily life? Men are filthy things like mud, and women are pure spring water. Ning Ke looked at Lu Qingjia, who was on horseback. He smiled and said, Is that what your highness is trying to say? Lu Qingjia's expression changed slightly. She did not expect this dark and dirty man to be able to summarize her thoughts so accurately and concisely. While she was surprised, the pride hidden under her calm and gentle appearance prevented her from mocking Ning Ke again. Instead, she nodded. Ning Ke suddenly smiled and asked, What about Prince Longqing? During his discussion with Mo Shanshan last night, he had mentioned that the flower addict, Lu Qingjia, who had grown up around the White Tower and lived in the Imperial Palace since she was a child, was as pure as a piece of paper in terms of cultivation and love. They could only start from these two aspects if they wanted to grab hold of the gap between her and Prince Longqing. Everyone knew about her relationship with Prince Longqing, so her so-called feelings would naturally fall on that perfect man. Lu Qingjia sensed that the young man with a hateful smile on his face had brought up Prince Longqing. She smiled mockingly and said calmly, An idiot like you would naturally not understand that a perfect and flawless man lives in the pure and bright world that you will never be able to touch. Hearing these words, especially the words perfect and flawless, Ning Ke could not help but think of Song Song's evaluation of Prince Longqing in the wine shop in Chang'an. He could not help but shake his head and laugh. Lu Qingjia's face turned cold when she saw him laughing for no reason. That was because his laughter was obviously because of Prince Longqing. To her, this was even more serious than humiliating herself. Ning Ke suddenly stopped smiling and looked at the beautiful girl on the horse. He asked seriously, In this world, other than the West Hill Divine Palace after the light and the wordless flowers and plants that you cherish so much, everything else is dirty and untouchable. Then I really want to know, Your Highness, do you really think that everything that happened on the meadow that day was clean? Lu Qingjia looked into his eyes and said calmly, That has nothing to do with me. I only know that if you want to use this to drive a wedge between me and Shanshan and lure her into the path of darkness, then you deserve to die. Ning Ke looked back into her eyes and said gently, What are you saying? If Your Highness really wanted to kill me, you would have done so long ago. Why did you specially call me here to talk in private? Lu Qingjia gently stroked the neck of the white horse and said softly, I just want to remind you today that no matter what you are thinking, even if you can hide it from Shanshan, you can't hide it from me and everyone else in the world. You're just an insignificant person like a worm. There are many people in the world who can make you wish you were dead. Ning Ke's expression became gentler and calmer. He said softly, What you are doing now seems to be the dirty methods of the world that you hate. Lu Qingjia looked at him and said, How Ian saw the suffering of the world and turned herself into an old woman to help the people and kill the evil. I don't want to get involved in your dirty ways, but it doesn't mean that I will never use harsh methods. At this moment, there was no coldness or disgust in her eyes. There was only calmness and gentleness. However, this calmness and gentleness made one feel even more depressed. That was because the gaze in her clear and moving eyes seemed to be looking at a mud skipper struggling in the mud. There was no pity, just a natural look of disdain. She was the flower addict of the 3 addicts in the world. She was a fairy above the clouds and should not be tainted by dust. On the other hand, Ning Ke was just an insignificant person who tried to get close to another addict with some petty tricks. It was natural for her to look down on him. It was natural for her to want him to obey her words. There was no unnatural feeling. This was the norm in the world. Ninkei had seen many colder gazes since he was young. His skin was as thick as a wall, and he did not care about the girl's expression at all. He smiled and replied, "Being alive is definitely better than being dead. I really can't think of any situation that can make people feel that they are better off dead than alive." Lu Qingjia asked, "Are you really curious?" Ninkei smiled and said, "This kind of thing is too dangerous. It's safer not to be curious." Lu Qingjia looked at him quietly and suddenly smiled. She said, "An insignificant person will always be an insignificant person. He only knows how to talk and play petty tricks. He will never dare to show the slightest bit of bravery in the real world." Perhaps the girl wanted to use these words to anger Ninkei so that she would have a reason to punish him. Or perhaps she was just a little disappointed and emotional after seeing Ninkei's performance. However, when Ninkei heard this, he suddenly became silent. He looked up at the azure sky and at the cloud that was gradually floating above the meadow. He frowned slightly and began to think about some problems. After the journey, he reflected on the 2 years since he left the city of Wei. The winter wind blew from afar in the wilderness, blowing his clothes and Lu Qingjia's hair. He did not speak, and neither did Lu Qingjia. Both of them were silent on the horse and on the horse. When I was in the city of Wei, the highest official was General Ma. That general only had a few hundred people under him. He was really powerful. However, I have seen General Shao Qi of the 7th Link Stockade village once. I was very excited because I was rewarded for my meritorious service. However, I did not expect that General Shao Qi did not even look me in the eye and left in a hurry after handing out the reward. I reckon that he still does not remember who I am. Ninkei retracted his gaze and looked at the girl on the horse. He smiled and said, "From that day on, I understood that no matter how many military achievements I made, I would always be an insignificant person. At that time, I did not know what cultivators looked like. I thought that you were all immortals who could fly in the sky. I did not know what kind of divine realm your world was. I thought that you all lived in a fairyland in the sky. As for the divine hall, Prince Long Qing, the Tao addict, the calligraphy addict, the flower addict, and the 3 addicts of the world, to me, an insignificant person, they were existences above the clouds. I did not even dare to hope to get close to them." He pointed at the cloud floating above the meadow. "But now many things seem to have changed. For example, I can sit in the same carriage with the calligraphy addict. For example, Your Highness, you are now on a horse and not on the cloud. You are so close to me." Ninkei looked at her and said with a smile, "We are so close that I can touch your face with my hand. I believe that other than the king of Yuelun Kingdom and Prince Long Qing, no one else has touched your face before. Don't be angry. I am just using this to explain something. The changes I mentioned just now were too intense and fast. It was so fast that I could only accept it passively. I did not have the time to summarize and analyze it. I did not have the time to discover a fact. That is why there are so many problems." Lu Qingjia looked at him quietly and asked, "What fact?" "The fact is that I am no longer an insignificant person. Then, I should not do things in the style of an insignificant person." After saying this, Ninkei smiled. His dimples filled the winter wind, blowing on the wilderness. His eyes reflected the white clouds floating in the sky. He was incomparably fresh and confident. He knew that the girl on the horse had psychological problems. He had prepared some other means, the means of an insignificant person. However, after being pressured by the other party, he suddenly thought of what second brother had told him before he left. He thought about what second brother would do if he was in second brother's shoes. Second brother was his idol, and youngest uncle was second brother's idol. Then, what would youngest uncle do if he was in second brother's shoes? Based on second brother's arrogant character, he would probably take off the ancient crown on his head and use it as a club to beat the flower addict on the horse until her face was swollen. He would definitely not have tender feelings for the fair sex. If it was youngest uncle, he would probably pull out his sword and cut off the head of the arrogant white horse. Then, he would step on the flower addict's face. Ninkei was not like second brother, who had reached the knowing destiny state. He was also not like youngest uncle, who had left Jianghu for a long time, but was still a legend. He was just a newcomer, and his state was pathetically at no doubt state. However, he was still a student at the back of the mountain of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. He did not have the ability to defeat the three addicts of the world. He could not drag Lu Qinjia off the horse, take off her pants, and spank her bare, but until it turned red. Then, he could ask Emo Shanshan to draw a sketch and send it to Prince Longqing. However, since he had already understood that he should leave the world of insignificant people and decided to reveal his identity, he naturally had his own way. When I bought this gift yesterday, I told the merchant from the Yin Kingdom that it was for you. Only then did he agree to sell it to me. I spent 100 taels of silver on it. It's not cheap. Ning Ke picked up the square box that he had been holding in his arms and untied the cloth on it. In the box was a small flower tree that was secured by a straw frame and protected by a paper film. He tore off the paper film and showed Lu Qinjia the breathtakingly beautiful blue petals and green stems. He said, "Of course, even if I gave this flower to you now, I believe that you would not change your opinion of me. So, I'm just letting you take a look." Lu Qinjia was slightly stunned. She looked at the blue flower tree in his hands and recognized that it was an extremely rare 7-petal blue lotus. This lotus was blue in color and extremely beautiful. Unfortunately, even though this flower was resistant to drought and cold, it was often accompanied by extremely strong nemesis. Therefore, there were very few of them in the world. The 7-petal blue lotus is indeed a good flower. It's not expensive to sell it for 100 taels of silver in the wilderness. Even though Lu Qinjia hated Ning Ke, she was a flower addict and naturally loved flowers. Her evaluation was extremely objective and honest. Then, she frowned slightly and reprimanded. Even if the 7-petal blue lotus is resistant to cold, it is still a plant from the south of Yan. How can it withstand the cold wind in the wilderness? Hurry up and put away the paper film. Ning Ke was very obedient. The girl on the horse asked him to keep it, so he kept it. However, he did not keep the rare flower tree in his hands, but the hands that were holding the flower pot. The flowering tree slipped from his hands and instantly fell to his feet. When it touched the hard ground of the wilderness, the flower pot cracked and shattered like fragile glass. The paper film of the straw rack was all smashed. The beautiful flowering tree inside suddenly became unrecognizable. Its petals were scattered and its green branches were broken. It seemed that it would never come back to life again. Lu Qinjia's expression changed drastically. She pulled the reins and took a few steps forward, but she could not stop this from happening. The beautiful blue petals were scattered on the ground. They rolled slowly in the wind and were stained with a lot of dust. The straw frame and paper film covered the rustling flower tree. The scene was extremely messy. She looked at the broken flowers on the ground in front of the horse, and her beautiful face suddenly paled. Her eyes revealed a look of pity. Then, she slowly turned around and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "Are you provoking me?" Tragedy was tearing the beauty of life apart and showing it to others. Everyone saw the beauty of life differently. The things that they cherished and loved were also different. Money, beauty, power, knowledge, cultivation, and so on. In Lu Qinjia's heart, the beauty of life was not the happiness of the secular world, but the flowers and plants that had nothing to do with the secular world. The deaths of the people in the camp below the meadow did not make her sad. Even if the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the students of the Revelation Institute fell in front of her, she would not feel sad. But when the 7-petal blue lotus was smashed into the mud in front of her, she really felt a wave of heartache. She knew that the young man in front of the horse had done it on purpose. So besides feeling heartache, she started to get angry. Hearing the sound of the flower pot breaking, the students of the Revelation Institute who were scattered around the meadow did not know what had happened. They rushed over as fast as they could. When they saw the broken flowers on the ground and the unconcealable pain and anger in Princess Lu Qinjia's eyes, they vaguely guessed what had happened. Everyone knew that Her Highness was crazy about flowers. This young man in the uniform of the Black Ink Garden actually dared to do such a thing in front of Her Highness. That was the greatest harm to Her Highness. It was a shameless provocation. With a series of clangs, the steel swords engraved with the talisman patterns of the divine hall were unsheathed. Everyone angrily surrounded Ning Quebec. Luchinjia got off the horse and walked towards Ning Quebec. She frowned and asked, "What good does my sadness and anger do to you?" Ning Ke looked at her and explained with a smile. "In the tent this morning, you once told Shan Shan that the sadness and happiness of the world have nothing to do with you. So I think that my relationship with Shan Shan and how I affect her has nothing to do with you. As for this 7-petal blue lotus, I was the one who bought it. So me smashing it has nothing to do with you. Whether you are sad or angry because of this has nothing to do with me. Since that is the case, it is none of your business if I smash it for fun." Lu Chenjiao looked into his eyes and said, "Flowers can't speak. They only bloom quietly. But in your hands, they have become a sacrifice in the battle between people. Don't you think that this is unfair to them?" Ninke looked in her eyes and said, "Those who died in the meadow, such as the senior brother from the Blacking Garden, can't speak now either. So this world is unfair to them. Of course, I am not someone who likes to fight for injustice. What I care about is that you threatened me earlier, so I have to make you unhappy. That is very fair." Lu Chenjia suddenly asked, "Who exactly are you?" The shattering of the blue lotus on the meadow in the wilderness seemed like a small matter, but in reality, it was like a hard slap to the girl's face. Moreover, she was not an ordinary girl. She was one of the 3 addicts in the world. She had the Yueluan Kingdom and the Divine Hall behind her. She was someone who was favored by both Buddhism and Taoism. Even the prince of the Tang Empire would not provoke her in such a way. So even though she was furious, she was still trying to guess Ning Ke's identity. Was he a daring and foolish person, or did he have a powerful background that allowed him to be unafraid of the Taoism and Buddhism sects? The first thing that was revealed was not Ning Ke's identity, but another identity that Lu Chenjia and the students of the Revelation Institute wanted to know, the identity of the owner of the big black horse. Ning Ke put his finger between his lips and blew a clear and even shrill whistle. After a while, loud hoofbeats sounded in the field to the north of the camp. The hoofbeats were messy and dense, as if the horses were in high spirits and happy. The big black horse came from afar and rushed to the meadow. Then, it walked carefully to Ning Ke's side and gently nudged his shoulder. It looked unusually docile. The unusually handsome snow horse behind Lu Chenjia suddenly saw the big black horse appear in front of it. It remembered the painful experience yesterday and was not comforted by the big black horse's docile expression. It retreated in fear. The reins broke free from Lu Chenjia's hand. Lu Chenjia looked at Ning Ke and the big black horse beside him, as well as the broken flowers and branches at his feet. Ning Ke's gentle expression finally disappeared. She stared at him coldly and said, "So, it's all because of you." Ning Ke cupped his hands in greeting and said gently, "Yes." The big black horse was the focus of everyone's discussion during the Gamumu gathering. The Chanyu of the palace and many other bigwigs were looking for it. They wanted to make it their own mount. Its sudden appearance had attracted countless people in the tribe. A dense crowd chased after it and came to the meadow at the same time. Lu Chenjia's voice was slightly cold as she said, "Do you think I won't dare to kill you just because there are so many people watching? I've said it before. You filth in the mortal world only know how to use petty tricks. You don't know that strength is everything. I know I'm weak, but I also know that strength doesn't mean everything." Ning Ke took out a waist token from his chest and held it in the air. He said, "Sometimes background is more important." A student of the Revelation Institute saw the words on the waist token and frowned. He said, "Fish Dragon Sect, what is this?" Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He looked at the waist token and smiled. "Sorry, I took the wrong one." He changed the waist token and held it in front of Lu Chenjia. The expressions of the students of the Revelation Institute changed slightly. Someone shouted, "So what if you're a student of the academy?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "You should have looked more closely." The students of the Revelation Institute took a closer look and saw clearly what this token represented. Everyone fell into a state of shock and silence. They did not know what to do with the divine hall swords in their hands. Lu Chenjia also saw the waist token clearly. Her gaze turned cold. "Is there anyone who wants to kill me now?" Ninkei looked at the students of the Revelation Institute around him and said sincerely, "If no one wants to kill me, then I'll leave first. The meeting that the Divine Hall has called should have started. I don't have much time to waste." Then he looked at Lu Qinjia and said with a smile, "I have a few words to say to you. First, if the difference between a small character and a big character is not their character, but their background, sect, or family, then I'm not a small character. Second, you don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. I think even the three great gods of the Divine Hall don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. So I hope that when we meet again in the future, Your Highness, you don't have to say so much nonsense. Finally, there's no perfect person in the world. Of course I'm not. Your partner Prince Long Qing isn't either. At least in front of me, he probably doesn't have the confidence to say such words." With that, Ninkei mounted the big black horse, lifted the reins, and galloped toward the camp. Before he mounted the horse, he stepped on the 7-petal blue lotus that was scattered on the ground. No one knew if it was intentional or not. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 233. Looking at the big black horse galloping away, many herdsmen and palace soldiers chased after it excitedly. The students of the Revelation Institute remained silent on the meadow. Many of them had already guessed Ning Kei's true identity. Thinking of the matter that had been the talk of the cultivation world since spring, they could not help but worry about Princess Chunjia's feelings. Princess Qinjia's fiancé was Prince Long Qing. The godlike man's life had been smooth sailing. Neither the elders of the Lang Temple nor the headmaster of the Revelation Institute could break his perfect exterior and exterior. He had only lost once in the academy in the south of Chong, and, although not many people knew what had happened that time, a loss was a loss. Today was probably the first time Lu Qinjia had seen the man who had defeated her fiancé. The students of the Revelation Institute were worried that she would be upset. They did not dare to look at her in case she felt embarrassed or angry. They could only lower their heads and pretend to look at the ground of the wilderness. There were 7-petal blue lotuses scattered on the meadow. It was a mess. Lu Qinjia's beautiful face did not show any embarrassment, but her usually calm heart was in a mess. She took out an expensive silk handkerchief from the snow saddle and walked to the broken flower pots. She carefully wrapped the blue lotuses that were about to wither and turn black from the cold wind. Then, she carried it in her arms and mounted the horse, walking towards her tent. A disciple of the Revelation Institute behind her mustered up the courage to remind her, "Your Highness, the Divine Hall has called for a meeting today to summarize the matters of the frontier fortress for the past few months. We also need to discuss the plan to deal with the Desolate Man next year. This is a serious matter. You should go and take a look." Lu Qinjia lifted the reins lightly. She did not care about the voice behind her, nor did she care about the meeting called for by the Divine Hall. She only looked at the big black horse in the distance, thinking about many things. When the news of the opening of the second floor of the academy spread in spring, she had been silently paying attention and praying. She hoped that her partner would get what he wanted and enter the back of the mountain to become the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. However, she did not expect such a proud, confident, and powerful man who seemed to never be defeated to actually be defeated. After that, Prince Long Qing returned to West Hill. Although the two had never discussed the matter of the second floor of the academy, she could clearly feel that the current Long Qing was slightly different from before. He was still proud and confident, radiating a dazzling brilliance. But there was something unnatural in that pride and confidence, and there was a very faint shadow in the brilliance. Lu Qinjia knew how all of this had happened. It was all because of Ning Quebec failure was not terrible. For people like Prince Long Qing and her, they had accurately understood the relationship between failure and success when they first learned cultivation at a very young age. However, Long Qing's state was profound and his Taoist heart was clear. He was only one step away from entering the knowing destiny state. Ning Kei, on the other hand, had just learned cultivation. His strength was weak and his state was shallow. One could imagine the blow to a cultivator's state of mind if he failed on such a basis. When it came to love, One would be happy because of the other person's happiness and sadness, and forget about the happiness and sadness of the outside world. As for the person who had defeated Long Qing and entered the back of the mountain of the academy, she certainly did not like him and even felt enmity towards him. If not for the fact that Long Qing had to remove the barrier of his Taoist heart himself, she might have even secretly gone to Chong and then humiliated him. Other than enmity and dislike, she could not help but be curious. No one, including her, would think that the headmaster of the academy would be biased when choosing a disciple, and that the academy would use any shameful tricks. Then, why did the person called Ning gain more attention than Long Qing? What kind of person was that person? She had finally seen that person today, and she also knew what kind of person he was. She believed that she would never forget Ning Kei's despicable look when he threw the flowers and taunted her. Because of this, her memories of the academy became unforgettable. She was ashamed and angry, but also emotional. Holding the reins tightly, the flower addict looked at the big black horse that was about to enter the meeting tent of the Divine Hall. She thought silently and doubtfully, would the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy all be as shameless as this person? The countries in the Central Plains were ordered by the Divine Hall to help the Yin Kingdom against the barbarians. The Tang Kingdom and the Yin Kingdom were located in the north, so they sent a large number of cavalries, while the other countries and sects sent their young cultivators to obey the order. Now that the coalition army and the palace had reached an agreement, the forces of all countries would naturally gather together to discuss what to do in the future. The convener was undoubtedly the Divine Hall. The Left King's palace had spent a lot of manpower and resources to set up a very large meeting tent for the bigwigs of the Divine Hall, showing their sincerity. The tent had a radius of 100 paces and was made of bamboo and wood. The tent was bright and spacious, and even if it could accommodate more than 100 people, it would not seem crowded. The priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall was the most distinguished person present, so he naturally sat in the middle. Xu Cheng, the general of the Tang Empire, sat close to his right, while the seat on his left was empty. The generals of the Yin Kingdom, the disciples of the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, and the disciples of the small vassal countries and sects sat below according to their respective seats. The seats of the students of the Revelation Institute were still empty. Mo Shanshan, the calligraphy addict, and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had already sat opposite those empty seats. The seats of the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were close to the camp of the Tang Empire, which was higher than that of the South Jin Kingdom and Yueluan Kingdom. Originally, the Great River Kingdom was weak and should not be treated with such courtesy. However, Mo Shanshan was too famous for the calligraphy addict. Except for a few people in the tent, no one was qualified to sit above her, so the Divine Hall made this arrangement. The discussion had not yet entered the main topic when an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin, wearing a beggar-like garment, walked in slowly with a cane in her hand, coughing from time to time. The priest of the Revelation Department bowed slightly and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work, Aunt." Everyone in the tent, including General Xu Cheng of the Tang Empire, stood up and saluted the old woman. This old woman was the sister of the king of the Yueluan Kingdom. Although she had given up the title of eldest princess because she had become a nun for cultivation, she still had the powerful forces of the Buddhism sect hidden behind her. Neither the Divine Hall nor the Tang Empire would slight her. Mo Shanshan did not stand up. She quietly looked at the hem of her white dress, as if she had found some unpleasant dirt there. She did not stand up, so the disciples of the Black Ink Garden behind her naturally did not stand up to salute her. On the contrary, the young girls knew that this old woman was on the meadow that day, so they could not help but show some hatred in their eyes. Everyone was drunk, and I was the only one awake. The one who was awake would be the odd one out. Everyone got up, and I sat quietly. The one who sat would be the odd one out. Everyone in the courtyard greeted him and bowed like waves, highlighting the Great River Kingdom girls who were sitting quietly. The greetings in the tent gradually quieted down. The atmosphere suddenly became silent and awkward. Aunt Cunimati glanced at the young girls coldly. Looking at these girls who were still fresh and lovely after being blown by the wind and sand of the wilderness for several months, she felt unhappy. Because of their disrespectful and even hostile eyes, she was even angrier. She sat down beside the priest of the Revelation Department and said in a gloomy tone before anyone spoke, "The tribes of the wilderness of the north are inseparable from the devil's doctrine. No one knows how many evil remnants of the devil's doctrine are hiding among the desolate men. Killing the evil is something that we of the righteous must do, so it is not hard to say. However, to deal with the desolate men, the first thing is to unite within the righteous sects and strengthen our own abilities." The old woman looked at the young disciples in the tent and said coldly, "In the past few months of fighting, you young juniors have performed well, but some people have done things in a mess. As a result, they have created a situation that is difficult to clean up and almost ruined the Divine Hall's plan. I think regardless of punishment, you must first learn to reflect on yourself." At this time, most of the people in the tent already knew that the disciples of Black Ink Garden had escorted the provisions here and were ambushed by the horse gang. They thought that Aunt Cuny's words should be referring to this matter. They did not know how the calligraphy addict and the disciples of Black Ink Garden would explain it. As expected, Cuny Mattie's deep-set eyes overflowed with disdain and anger. She said coldly, "In order to repair the wilderness, the Divine Hall decided to send provisions to assist the palace. Now that the provisions have been destroyed, although Chanyu did not say anything, and there is no problem with the peace talks, someone has to be responsible for this in the name of Haoyan." Hearing this virtuous and respected aunt speak out directly, the crowd could not help but fall silent. Only the sound of long and short breaths could be heard faintly. Many people looked at Mo Shanshan, who had been sitting quietly. Hearing this, the priest of the Revelation Department smiled slightly. He knew that the old woman did not like the Black Ink Garden for some reason and wanted to make a fuss. However, before leaving, the great divine priest of Revelation had told him that the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, was too lonely. If he wanted her to become the pillar of the Divine Hall in the future, she still needed to be polished. So he did not say anything. General Xu Chang came from Chang and city and did not care about the internal affairs of the Divine Hall. However, the Empire and the Great River Kingdom had always been on good terms. At this time, seeing Cuny Mattie oppressing the girls of the Great River Kingdom, he was a little displeased. He frowned slightly and asked what happened. The priest of the Revelation Department was a man with white hair and beard, but he still looked very young. After thinking for a while, he said gently, "Chunbachi, the commander of the Papal Guardians of the Judicial Department, personally experienced this matter. Let him tell you." These words seemed ordinary and casual, but in fact, it was extremely clever. The Papal Guardians of the Divine Hall were under the command of the two priests of the Judicial Department and had nothing to do with the Revelation Department. He let the commander come to explain. No matter what the result of the dispute would be, the Revelation Department could still stay out of it and maintain a detached and fair position. Chunbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, looked at the crowd with a solemn face and said, "That day, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were timid and afraid to fight, and let the horse gang break into the camp. The soldiers and civilians of the Yin Kingdom suffered heavy casualties. I saw that things were not right, so I led the troops to take the risk and launch a surprise attack to break the siege of the horse gang." The disciples of the Black Ink Garden looked at each other and felt cold all over. Their clenched fists trembled slightly. They had lived in Mogan Mountain since childhood. How could they know that there was such a shameless person in the world? Catgirl rushed out with a red face and shouted angrily at the commander of the cavalrymen, "Chunbachi, you are shameless. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Please continue to let me thank you. Tonight, I will start to revise the second volume. That's it. Tomorrow, 6,000 words will be guaranteed at least. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 234. Catgirl pointed at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and scolded with a red face. The Revelation Department priest's face darkened slightly. Aunt Cuny Mattie's eyes were suddenly filled with anger. She stared at the little girl and said coldly, "You don't have any respect for seniority. How did your master teach you? Is it your turn to speak out?" Zhujiahua took 2 steps forward and pulled Catgirl back behind her. She bowed to those bigwigs and forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart. She said in a trembling voice, "Aunt, this matter is related to the reputation of our black ink garden. Junior brother Sure was buried in the meadow. Can't we talk?" Cuny Mattie's wrinkled face showed a trace of disgust. She said gloomily, "As a disciple of the master calligrapher, he couldn't even defeat the horse gang. He deserved to die because he was not as good as others." For hundreds of years, the Ueloan Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom had been incompatible because of the dispute in the Tiamu Forest. No one knew how many big and small wars had taken place between the two sides. It could be called a blood feud for generations. The Ueloan Kingdom had a vast territory and was a place where Buddhism flourished. Its strength was far above the Great River Kingdom. Especially in recent years, the relationship between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Ueloan royal family was getting better and better. If the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom were not close, the monk army of the Ueloan Kingdom might have already set foot on the territory of the Great River Kingdom. As the sister of the king of Ueloan Kingdom, Cuny Mattie certainly hated the people of the Great River Kingdom. She was involved in the coercion at the Yin camp over the past few months, the snatching of the hot spring, and the difficult task of transporting provisions. Therefore, she was not polite to the disciples of Black Ink Garden and spoke harshly and overbearingly. Since the disciples of the Black Ink Garden left the Mogan Mountain of the Great River Kingdom and came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yin Kingdom, they had been constantly enduring the humiliation and frame-up from the Ueloan Kingdom. Now in the tribe of the Palace of the Wilderness, in a meeting convened by the Divine Hall, they did not feel ashamed at all. They even spoke rudely to the dead fellow disciples. Even if the girls were gentle, they could not control their anger and stood up one after another. With the clear sound of swords swinging, more than a dozen slender swords were aimed at Aunt Cuny Mattie. At this moment, they had already forgotten how noble this old lady was. Under the wide tent, the monk from the Ueloan Kingdom's White Tower Temple saw the disciples of the Black Ink Garden dare to draw their swords. They stood up angrily and wanted to rush to Aunt Cuny Mattie to protect her. Cuny Mattie raised her old arm to indicate to the sadhus. Cuny Mattie raised her swords in their hands and looked at the kingdom's girls of the disciples of the... And kingdom's eyes. How could the Great River Kingdom girls be allowed to act recklessly in the meeting convened by the Divine Hall? Instead, the aunt cold-bloodedly hoped that the girls would be blinded by hatred. Once they really dared to use their swords against her, both the people of the Divine Hall and the cultivators from other countries would deal with them harshly. More importantly, even the Tang general who had been silent all the time would not be able to intervene. Shua her and held and looked Chu and looked back. Many people, like her, looked at that place. Mo Shan, the calligraphy addict, was still sitting quietly in the chair. She didn't seem to hear Cuny Mattie's insult to her sect. She didn't seem to have any opinion on what happened on the meadow and felt nothing. She looked down at her pure white dress and seemed to regard the stain as a lotus flower. Because of her silence, the atmosphere in the tent became more and more tense. No one knew whether the kingdom's girls would draw their swords out of shame and anger, which would lead to uncontrollable consequences. The priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall, who was sitting in the first seat, looked more and more gloomy. A few drops of dew seemed to condense between his white eyebrows. This bigwig had enough reasons to be dissatisfied with Cuny Mattie and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. For example, they didn't respect him. But thinking of a relationship between the judicial department and the Ueloan Kingdom, he didn't say a word. The invisible string in the air became tighter and tighter. The sarcasm and contempt in the wrinkles on Cuny Mattie's face became more and more obvious. If the situation went on like this, the Great River Kingdom's girls would still be humiliated. But if the Great River Kingdom's girls dared to despise the majesty of the Divine Hall and fight by themselves, no one knew what kind of miserable end they would face. The headmaster of the academy once said that the more you argue, the clearer the truth will be. No matter what the truth of the horse gang's robbery is, you should always listen to the opinions of both sides. You little girls should talk nicely. Why did you pull out the sword from the scabbard? Don't you know that Aunt Cuny Mattie is so straightforward? These words contained a hint of mockery of Cunimati's behavior and manner of talking. It vaguely showed that she was partial to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. Everyone in the tent could not help but be in an uproar. However, the person who said this was General Shu Cheng of the Tang Empire. So neither the priest of the Divine Hall nor Cunimati herself could question it. Cunimati snorted coldly. She looked back at General Shu and said in a cold voice, "I'd like to see what they can say." Zhuo Jihua was gentle and had the ability of a deacon. She took this opportunity to reprimand her junior sisters to step back. Then she took a few steps forward, bowed with hands folded in front, and carefully told what happened on the meadow that day. The same story, told by different people, had the same ending, but the process was completely different. In the words of Chen Bachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom were a group of incompetent and cowardly good-for-nothings, which led to the destruction of the provisions and the heavy casualties of the soldiers and civilians of the Yan Kingdom. In Zhuo Jihua's story, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow were cold-blooded and selfish. They clearly saw their fellow righteous people in a desperate situation, but they refused to help. Only when the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were about to win the bloody battle did they rush down to snatch the military merits. Zhuo Jihua was careful not to mention Aunt Cunimati, flower addict Lu Qinjia, and people of the White Tower Temple of the Revelation Institute. However, everyone present knew why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall entered the wilderness. Their faces changed slightly. The cultivators of the South Jin Kingdom and the Tang army subconsciously glanced at Cunimati with a somewhat complicated expression. Everyone somewhat believed that the story of the Black Ink Garden disciples was true because these girls were unreasonable. In order to shirk their responsibilities, they had offended the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom. Their provisions had been destroyed, so they should not be punished too harshly. However, who knew what kind of trouble there would be if they offended these bigwigs? Belief was the human heart, but there was no such thing as the will of the people in the world. What was important was evidence. Besides evidence, there was also strength. The stronger the strength and background, the more powerful the words of the person. The Great River Kingdom was small and weak. Although there was a master of calligrapher in the Black Ink Garden, he was just a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. How could he compete with the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom? Cunimati coldly stared at Zhuo Jihua, who had finished her story and retreated. After a moment of silence, she suddenly laughed in a very strange and hoarse voice, looking particularly gloomy. "I was also on the meadow that day. According to what you said, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not join the battle in time. Isn't it also my responsibility? Aren't you saying that I'm also cold-blooded and selfish?" Zhuo Jihua looked up at her quietly with her eyes full of determination and said, "I didn't know that you were also on the meadow at that time. As for whether you had anything to do with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall's failure to rescue in time, I naturally don't know. Whether I'm responsible or cold-blooded, it's up to you, Aunt." There was an uproar in the field. No one thought that this female disciple of the Black Ink Garden had the courage to directly point at Cunimati. Some people faintly admired her courage. Cunimati stared at Zhuo Jihua and shouted angrily, "What a bunch of nonsense! In order to shirk your responsibilities, you dare to confuse right and wrong and frame the Divine Hall and me. Your aunt, loved the younger generation, wanted to let you go and punish you a little bit. I didn't expect that you were so evil. Then don't blame me for teaching you a lesson on behalf of your master." Catgirl stared at her and said, without showing weakness, "You're so old and you're still lying. You're shameless." Cunimati was so angry that she laughed. She sat back in the chair and said nothing, just waiting for the final result. The priest of the Revelation Department was silent. He gently stroked the snow-white hair on the top of his head and sighed faintly in the bottom of his heart. He was a little unhappy with the old woman beside him, but he had no way to deal with her. In the previous dispute between the two sides, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were very moderate in their accusations. They only targeted the cavalrymen of the Judicial Department and did not involve Cunimati and the people of the White Tower Temple of the Revelation Institute. However, this old woman actually jumped into it on her own initiative. She was using her old face to force the Divine Hall to express its position. If he later decided to favor the black ink garden, it meant that he believed the words of the girls and admitted that the highly respected Aunt Cunimati was afraid of death and even had the malicious intention of killing people with a borrowed knife. The West Hill Divine Palace and the Buddhism sect had a close relationship. The unknown place behind them had been communicating with each other for thousands of years. Although they respected Taoism, they supported each other. In the secular world, the Divine Hall needed the loyalty and offerings of the Yuelan Kingdom's royal family. Not to mention that both sides could only narrate what happened that day without any evidence. Even if the disciples of the Black Ink Garden produced evidence and the priest was willing to punish the cavalrymen of the judicial department for the sake of superficial justice, at this moment, in order to save the old face of Aunt Cunimati, he could only choose to believe the words of the commander. The hatred between the Yuelan Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom has accumulated so much. After a moment of silence, the priest of the Revelation Department looked at the crowd and said calmly, "The peace agreement between the Central Plains and the palace has been reached. Although the batch of provisions was destroyed, it is not a big deal. I will punish the disciples of the Black Ink Garden to copy the scriptures of light 3 times. However, in the previous dispute, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden accused the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall of being untruthful and disrespectful to the elders. You should sincerely apologize to Aunt." After finishing his sentence, he looked back at the Tang army sitting on the right side. General Xu Chang was silent for a moment. He felt that such a light punishment was a rare kindness from the Divine Hall. After nodding, he looked at the girls of the Great River Kingdom and comforted them gently. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden are not afraid of writing. Aunt Cunimati's face was still gloomy. It was obvious that she was very dissatisfied with the priest of the Revelation Department. But she was also clear about the dark dispute between the 3 departments of the Divine Hall. She knew that the matter involved the cavalrymen of the Judicial Department and the Revelation Department would not be too partial. So she remained silent and looked up indifferently, waiting for the apology. Listening to the priest of the Revelation Department's final decision, the monks of the White Tower Temple did not know what to think. But the disciples of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom all thought that the Tang people and the Great River Kingdom were close. If the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were bullied too much, it would probably lead to more disputes. Now that the people of the Tang camp expressed their satisfaction, they were relieved. No one cared about the feelings of the girls of the Great River Kingdom. They stood alone in the corner of the tent, still holding the Shio sword in their hands, but their eyes were full of anger and confusion. They knew in advance that it was impossible for the Divine Hall to deal with it fairly, because the apologetic Divine Army was originally the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. But they did not expect that the Divine Hall would deal with it in such a way. The priest of the Revelation Department's decision was very gentle in everyone's eyes. However, these girls from the South were gentle and firm. What they cared about was not the gentleness, but the reversal of black and white behind it. So they were angry. However, in the face of the bright and majestic Divine Hall, in the face of the whole cultivation world, in the face of the reality that everyone in the tent breathed a sigh of relief, what could they do? Did they really have to bow their heads and apologize to the old woman? So they were confused. All the disciples of the Black Ink Garden, including Zhu Jihua, turned their heads and looked at Emo Shanshan, who was sitting quietly in the chair. Emo Shanshan slowly rose to her feet. There was not a single trace of emotion on her elegant and indifferent face. Her thin, red lips were pursed into a straight line, making her look particularly unyielding. It formed a sharp contrast with her soft, black hair. Her dress flowed down like water. She stood in the water and looked at the bigwigs above. She shook her head and said calmly, "Priest, I don't accept this result." At this time, many people were watching her and wanted to know what she would say. According to the rumored temperament of the calligraphy addict, people were not very worried. However, they did not expect that the rumored calligraphy addict seemed to be vaguely different from the real calligraphy addict in front of them. Her response was so simple and stern. There was no emotional debate or angry accusation. From the beginning of the meeting, she had been silent until the Divine Hall came out with the final result. Then she said softly, "I don't accept it." Since she didn't accept it, then it was as if nothing had happened. The expression of the priest of the Revelation Department changed slightly. He leaned forward slightly and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was not far away. His white hair and beard slowly released a coercion. He had been waiting for the calligraphy addict to show her attitude, but she had not shown it before. At this time, when all parties came out with the result, she made her statement. He could only think that it was a provocation to the dignity of the Divine Hall. "Hill Master, I have always respected you. I really want to know what your attitude is." Mo Shanshan looked at the priest calmly and bowed slightly. She said, "My attitude is that I don't accept it. Neither I nor my master will accept the unfair result." Why mention the master of calligrapher? Even if he is here today, I will say the same. Cuny Maddie stared at her white cheeks coldly and asked in a gloomy tone, "Hill Master, you have the guts not to accept the result of the Divine Hall. Do you think that the Divine Hall and I, an old woman, have been unfair?" The saying, "Age is more ruthless than death," described this aunt. She was an extremely honorable senior cultivator, but today she had forced the room for conversation into nothingness twice. Her gloomy words were like a cold sword stabbing directly into the other's heart. Everyone present knew the elegant and dull temperament of the calligraphy addict. Although her previous performance had surprised everyone, they thought that Aunt Cuny Maddie had thrown the Divine Hall in front of her at this time, so she should remain silent. However, today the calligraphy addict surprised everyone again. Mo Shanshan looked at the old woman expressionlessly and said calmly, "You have always been unfair." Countless sounds of people sucking in cold breaths rang out in the tent. The priest of the Revelation Department looked at her quietly and said, "Hill Master, if there is no evidence, you can't accuse the Divine Hall of being unfair. I don't want to send a letter to Mogan Mountain. Please be careful." Mo Shanshan's sparse eyelashes trembled slightly. Her eyes were unfocused, as if she was looking into the distance. She said, "What I don't understand is why what I and my fellow disciples of the Black Ink Garden say is not evidence. Then why is what they say the evidence?" There was silence in the tent. The calligraphy addict's words directly pointed out the most fundamental problem of today's matter. However, whether words could be used as evidence had nothing to do with the degree of credibility. It was only related to who the speaker was. The effect of the words of a rich man and a beggar in the court was always different. This was the way of the world. What could they do? Cuny Maddie suddenly laughed hoarsely and old. When the laughter gradually subsided, she looked at Mo Shanshan not far away and said with pride, contempt, and sarcasm, "Who in the world will believe that I, Cuny Maddie, will also tell a lie?" It was not who would believe, but who dared to believe. After a moment of silence, the priest of the Revelation Department looked at the disciples of various countries and asked, "Does anyone know where the horse gang came from? Did any disciples of other sects pass through the meadow that day?" No one answered, because there were indeed no other cultivators passing through the meadow that day. As for the horse gang, there might be some lucky ones who escaped, but how could they find them in the vast wilderness? In the quiet meeting tent, Mo Shanshan bowed her head and looked at the tips of her shoes poking out from under her skirt. She was silent for a long time, thinking about what someone had said to her in the carriage, about the tiger and the rabbit and the tiger and the tiger. "I can accept the punishment from the Divine Hall, but the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall said that the disciples of the Black Ink Garden are muddle-headed and incompetent, cowardly and afraid to fight, and even dare not to fight against the horse gang. I can't accept it. I've been thinking about how to prove my courage and ability." She flicked her fingertips and pulled out a tiny saber from the waist of Zhuozhihua. She looked at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, named Chinbachi, expressionlessly and said, "Although you are also a cultivator of the see-through realm, I will not be bored enough to challenge you, because you are not qualified, so you don't have to worry." Mo Shanshan turned her eyes slightly and fell on Cuny Maddie's ugly old face, which was like a paddy field after a drought. She calmly said, "I am Mo Shanshan, a disciple of the Black Ink Garden. Aunt, please enlighten me." As soon as she finished speaking, she put the small saber across her palm, with a blade facing down. She exerted force on her wrist and was ready to cut it open. "Wait." The priest of the Revelation Department and General Shu of the Tang Kingdom were shocked and stood up to stop her. The Great River Kingdom was deeply influenced by the Tang Kingdom. Even if it was a duel, It was customary to follow the rules of Chong and City. Cutting sleeves was an invitation to a duel, and cutting palms was a duel to the death. The reaction of the people in the tent was a little slower than that of the two bigwigs. After a while, they understood the intention of her action and stood up in shock. There was a sound of chairs and stools collapsing. Mo Shanshan had issued an invitation to a duel to the death to Aunt Cuny Matty. As everyone knew, Mo Shanshan was one of the most famous 3 addicts in the world among the younger generation of cultivators. She was a master at the upper see-through state. However, the so-called 3 addicts were not only related to the state of cultivation, but also to the appearance of the 3 women. But the person she was going to challenge today was Aunt Cuny Matty, a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect who had been famous for a long time. Although she was the calligraphy addict, no one was optimistic that she could defeat a predecessor who had decades of cultivation. Therefore, everyone felt that the calligraphy addict looked particularly beautiful today because of her willpower. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Cuny Matty looked at the junior coldly. She held the armrest of the chair with her skinny old tree-like hand and slowly stood up. The priest of the Revelation Department looked at Mo Shanshan and reprimanded her angrily. "What are you doing? Put away your saber quickly." Mo Shanshan seemed to have not heard what he said at all. She held the hilt of the saber with her right hand slightly. There was chaos outside the tent. It was extremely noisy. When the tent curtain was lifted and Ning K walked in with the big black horse, he saw Mo Shanshan holding the knife horizontally in her palm. He was so shocked that he did not care that there were so many people in the tent. He shouted angrily, "What are you doing? Put away your saber quickly." Mo Shanshan looked at him in the distance and slowly put down the knife in her hand. She said softly, "Apart from this, I can't think of any other way to wash away the injustice of my dead comrade, because he is already dead and will not speak again. And it seems that no one will listen to what I say." There was no expression on her face. She was so calm that it seemed that she was talking about a trivial family matter. However, in Ning K's eyes, the girl standing there alone was obviously so fragile and sad. Only he could see her fragile and sad. Everyone in the tent followed Mo Shanshan's gaze to the tent curtain. They looked at Ning K with curiosity and surprise. The Revelation priest could not stop the calligraphy addict, but this person said exactly the same words as the priest, and the calligraphy addict obediently put away her saber. Then, people in the tent noticed the trust in the calligraphy addict's calm eyes. They noticed the dependence hidden in the eyes of the great river kingdom girls that suddenly brightened. Only then did they realize that they seemed to be used to placing their hopes on this young man. They could not help but feel more confused. When people saw the big black horse in his hand, they were even more shocked and speechless when they thought of the scene on the horse race road yesterday. They all thought to themselves, "Who on earth is this young man?" Last night, I did not finish the revision of this volume. I will continue today and tomorrow. Also, I have to say in advance that the first chapter of this volume has been revised. But the words at the end of the chapter are more important, including the advertisement of Futian. So I will not touch them for the time being. When this volume is finished, I will replace them together. Also, there is no rest this Saturday. Don't forget, last notice, the first place in the weekly list is very dangerous. Don't forget to vote for the recommendation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 235. Catgirl rushed over and repeated what had happened in the tent in detail. Especially when she mentioned Cuny Matty's words, the little girl was even more furious. Everyone in the tent silently watched the conversation between Ning K and Catgirl. Because they did not know the specific identity of the young man, they remained silent for the time being. They were very curious about what would happen next. Now that the priest of the Revelation Department had come to a conclusion and Aunt Cuny Matty's expression was gloomy, would there be any change? Many people of the Palace tribe followed the big black horse to the tent. It was noisy until the steward of the Divine Hall, who was responsible for maintaining order, went out to reprimand them. Then it gradually quieted down. Ning K knew what had happened from Catgirl's narration. After a moment of silence, he put the reins of the big black horse on the tobacco pipe at the entrance of the tent but did not tie it tightly. He looked at Imo Shanshan in the distance and said, "So that's what happened. Is it worth for you to cut your palm? There must be other ways to prove it." Everyone in the tent was still silent. They looked at him with some curiosity and some mockery. They thought that although there was no evidence, the matter of meeting the horse gang on the meadow was not about evidence. How could he prove it? These thoughts and feelings were hidden in the hearts of the people, but Cat Girl asked directly. Thinking of the anger and helplessness of her senior sisters, she looked at Ning Ke with her big bright eyes and asked confusedly, "How can you prove it?" Ning Ke replied seriously, "I can prove it because I was there." He glanced at the disciples of various sects of the Central Plains in the tent with different expressions, raised his right hand to point at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance, and said, "I can prove that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow did not help us and just looked on coldly. After we beat back the horse gang, the commander led the cavalrymen to rush down the meadow, cut off the heads of the horse gang, and snatch the military merits. And I think he even had the idea of killing us at that time." Hearing this, there was an uproar in the tent. The young man not only pointed out that the cavalryman of Divine Hall was despicable and cold-blooded, but also made a more serious accusation of killing us. The uproar, like the wind blowing through the pine forest, gradually subsided. People looked at Ning Ke with more complicated and weird eyes, thinking that the Divine Hall should believe his words. No one believed that he could turn the situation around. They all felt that he was courting death by accusing the Divine Hall. The face of the priest of the Revelation Department darkened slightly. His silver-like hair was as taut as iron, and he looked unhappy. He didn't expect that the calligraphy addict would be so tough when this farce was about to come to an end. Moreover, this young man who came out of nowhere was trying to make things more troublesome for him. Just as he was about to reprimand him, he noticed from the corner of his eyes that the expression of the great Tang, General Shu on his right, was somewhat strange. This strange expression came from the smile on the general's face, a smile with a deeper meaning. The priest of the Revelation Department was slightly shocked, wondering if the general of the Tang Empire knew this person. The West Hill Divine Palace illuminated the world and enjoyed a high status. However, they still maintained vigilance and uneasiness towards the Tang Empire's imperial cavalry, which was also respect. Seeing General Shu reveal such an expression, the priest frowned and did not speak. Chinbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, was accused of being cold-blooded and selfish, not helping the allies, and even trying to kill people to keep their mouths shut after robbing the military merits. His face was already as gloomy as the wet clouds in Min Mountain. He stared at Ning Ke fiercely at the tent curtain. Although he didn't think that this person was the dark shadow behind the wall of fire under the meadow, he noticed his clothes and angrily rebuked, "Judging from your clothes, you should be a disciple of the Black Ink Garden. In that case, how are you qualified to accuse me of this matter?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I am not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden." After saying this, he took Catgirl's hand and walked into the tent. His leather boots stepped on the thick carpet, making no sound, and his footsteps seemed so stable. The disciples of various sects who were looking at him on both sides of the road looked more and more dignified. They thought that this person admitted that he was not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden. So where did his calmness come from? The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall's eyes lit up and glanced at Aunt Cunimati. Since Ning Ke appeared in the tent, Cunimati had been indifferent and silent. She didn't even look at him, because she didn't care about these small fries. Until she felt the gaze of the commander of the cavalrymen. She slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Ke, who was walking towards her. She said in a cold voice, "Since you are not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, why did you appear in the camp of the grain team that day? Why did you wear the clothes of the Black Ink Garden? I don't know what kind of heterodox doctrine you are. How dare you pretend to be a righteous person? Take him down and ask him carefully." This was the real confidence brought by the status and strength. Aunt Cunimati, a powerful person who could summon wind and rain, wouldn't spend any time debating and negotiating with the opponent. She directly hit him with a stick. Even if she didn't beat him to death, she would knock him out. Even if she wanted to wrongly accuse him, she would do it openly. What else could she say? Hearing the words of Aunt Cunimati, the disciples of other sects in the tent were still a little hesitant. However, the sadhus from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom had already stood up with their staffs and were ready to subdue and take down this young man. Mo Shanshan slightly frowned. Before she gave the order, the girls of the Great River Kingdom behind her exclaimed and were about to stop the monks of the White Tower Temple with their swords in their hands. The situation was in chaos. At this moment, a monk of the White Tower Temple saw Ning Kei's face clearly. He was suddenly shocked and reached out to stop his senior brother beside him. He hurried to Kunimati and said a few words in a low voice. This monk was the one who was ordered by his master to ask for the ownership of the hot spring. He hurt Zhuji Hua and beat Cat Girl, but was finally seriously injured by Ning Kei's sword and arrow. He had a deep impression of the encounter that day. Ning Kei didn't wear a mask that day. How could he not recognize him when they met again today? Kunimati heard that this young man turned out to be a student of the academy. Her deep-set eyes suddenly shone, and the wrinkles on her face seemed to be blown away by the wind. She stared at Ning Kei and said in a hoarse and fierce voice, "It turns out that you are a student of the academy. How dare you be so arrogant and presumptuous? Do you think that I don't dare to teach you a lesson?" Ning Kei had already walked to the front and let Cat Girl go back to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. He looked at the old woman and frowned. He shook his head and said, "I just want to prove something for the people of the Black Ink Garden. Why do you teach me a lesson? Do you think you are my teacher? Or are you afraid that I will tell the truth? What are you afraid of?" The 4 questions in a row were not aggressive, but calm and gentle. But thinking that the 4 questions were aimed at Aunt Kunimati, who was eccentric and gloomy and had an extremely high status, the people present could naturally feel the hidden toughness in it. They could not help but be shocked and thought that even if he was a student of the academy who came to the wilderness for practice, his behavior was too presumptuous. Kunimati was expressionless and looked at Ning Kei coldly, as if she was looking at a dead man. Although it seemed that she was not angry because of his words, those who really knew this aunt knew that she was extremely furious at this time. "I don't know which instructor in the academy your teacher is, but I think it's not impossible for me to teach you a lesson given my seniority and status. As for the truth, I really want to know what evidence you can bring out." Kunimati's voice was hoarse and unpleasant, but with a harsh contempt and mockery. Ning Kei smiled and said, "My words are the evidence." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was furious and snapped, "What a joke! Since when can a person's words be used as evidence?" Ning Kei was not angry and replied softly, "I heard that what this old lady said was used as evidence by everyone. Then why can't my words be used as evidence?" There was an uproar again and again. This time, it was not because of the toughness shown by the academy student, but because of the title old lady. He clearly knew the identity of Aunt Kunimati, but he used this kind of domestic language to address her. What he showed was not only toughness, but also undisguised contempt. "Old lady," Kunimati had never been addressed like this in her life. Whether it was the king of Yueluan Kingdom or the 3 great divine priests of the Divine Hall, they were all polite to her. She did not expect that she would be humiliated by a junior like this today. She was so angry that she trembled all over. Her old hands tightly grasped the back of the chair, and it seemed that she would stand up and fight at any time. If she had not known that Ning Kei was a student of the academy, maybe Ning Kei would have been dead at this time. But even if Ning Kei was a student of the academy, she did not intend to show any respect to the Tang Empire and must teach this guy a lesson. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not bear it any more and flew into a rage. He slammed the table beside him and angrily rebuked, "Aunt is the sister of the king of Yueluan Kingdom, Vedanta of the Buddhism sect. Who do you think you are? How dare you be compared with Aunt?" Ning Kei walked to the girls of the Great River Kingdom and smiled slightly, indicating that the worried girls should not panic. Then he nodded to Mo Shanshan to tell her to leave everything to him. Suddenly, the smile on his face disappeared, and he slammed the table beside him into 2 halves. He lectured, "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me in this tone?" At this time, people in the tent already knew that this young man was a bold guy. Even Aunt Kunimati was called an old lady by him. Naturally, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was nothing in his eyes. Although people were still shocked, they did not make an uproar anymore. They silently and coldly watched the development of the situation. It was silent. At this time, if a cat walked on the thick carpet, it would attract everyone's attention. Ninkei tidied up the front of his clothes and was ready to take out the LMID token on his waist. But he was a little hesitant. What kind of action should he take out, and what kind of expression should he show? Pride or disdain? It was always very difficult to take out a card beautifully and freely, whether it was the card in the hand or the ID token. The government runner took out the ID token and pointed it at the robber and said calmly, "I'm a messenger." The robber panicked and gave up. The god of gamblers took out the card at the bottom and said with a smile, "No more, no less. I'm just a little bigger than you." The opponent sitting across the long table turned pale and fell to the ground the next moment, clutching his chest. As long as one took out the card in a natural and unrestrained manner, no matter the action, expression, or tone, they must be very well coordinated. In this way, it would not seem that you were bullying others. Instead, you would be calm and arrogant to the extreme, but you would not smell any anger. Among all the people Ning Kane knew in his life, there were countless people who were as arrogant as him. But only second brother was so arrogant that he admired him so much and was so arrogant that he was hopelessly handsome. In his mind, if second brother took out the ID token at this time, he would definitely shock a lot of powerhouses and charm a lot of girls. No, second senior brother didn't need to take out his waist tag. The wooden club on second senior brother's head was an excellent waist tag. With second brother's warning in front of him, Ninkei paid great attention to his demeanor when representing the back mountain of the academy for the first time. He had already regretted taking out the ID token casually on the meadow, and now he was even more uncertain. Holding it in the air like a torch, it was a clear display, but it would be a little stupid. Drawing it out like drawing a knife? It was indeed handsome, but what if people did not see clearly what was written on the ID token and misunderstood that he was going to fight? Although he had gotten rid of the mentality of a nobody and was not afraid of the Aunt of the Divine Hall, if they really had a fight, that old woman could kill him with one finger. At this time, the atmosphere was tense and depressing, as Silent Hill. Everyone looked at Ning Kei and noticed that his expression was a little weird, as if he was thinking about some very complicated problems. But they did not know that the problems he was thinking about had nothing to do with anything in the field and were purely about other people's business. General Xu Cheng had been staring at Ning Kei since he entered the tent. This general from the military ministry of Chang and had already guessed Ning Kei's identity. At this time, looking at Ning Kei's expression, he thought that it was indeed a little inappropriate to ask Ning Kei to introduce himself in such a place like the back mountain of the academy. So he coughed slightly and said with a smile, "Mr. 13, since you are not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, should you sit beside me?" General Xu Jun's voice attracted everyone's attention. Ning Kei was slightly stunned. He did not expect that this general had already known his identity. But then he felt a lot more relaxed. He nodded to Mo Shanshan beside him and walked over as he was told. "Let me introduce him to you." General Xu Cheng stood up and gently held Ning Kei's shoulder. He first nodded to the priest of the Revelation Department and then looked at the people in the tent. He said with a calm smile, "This is the most famous calligrapher of the Tang Empire in the Tianqi year. He is deeply loved by His Majesty. At the same time, he is also the successor of the West Hill Great Divine Priest Yin Se. But what I want you to know is that he is Ning Kei, who defeated Prince Long Qing in the competition on the second floor of the academy this year." Ning Kei folded his hands and bowed to the people with a gentle expression. It was quiet in the tent. All the emotions had not had time to ferment and erupt, but everyone looked at Ning Kei with endless shock and admiration. The priest of the Revelation Department smiled without saying anything and looked at Ning Kei with great interest. He had already guessed something before, and now his guess was confirmed. He was still shocked, but he did not show it on the surface. In this silence, Ning Kei looked at Aunt Cuny Matty, who looked more and more gloomy, and said, "I heard that you once said, 'Who in the world would believe that you would lie?'" After a pause, he turned to the people in the tent and asked with a smile, "Then I really want to know, who in the world would believe that a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy would lie? No one dared to answer, whether in the field, in the tent, or in the world. I suddenly realized that this seems to be the first time since Fanxian that I have written with strong colors. It seems that I like it. Sulu had never written with his father, only with his fists. After Ning Ke succeeded in writing with his father these 2 days, he also began to write with his fists. Why am I so ambitious? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the revised version, revised in 201202250 to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 236. I have revised the last chapter, and it should be more detailed. This chapter is on Saturday. Because I have to go out during the day, I stayed up all night to write it. I will send it on time. I wish everyone a good weekend. Just like the silence after Kunimati asked this question, it was not that no one did not believe what Ninkei said, but that no one dared to not believe what Ninkei said. The reason was also simple. It was not because Ninkei had a noble and holy reputation, but because he was ranked 13th in the back of the mountain of the academy and had a teacher called the headmaster. For people in the world, the West Hill Divine Palace was naturally the most sacred and solemn place, and the academy in the southern suburbs of Chong, and the capital of the Tang Empire, was the most noble place. The Tang Empire's cavalry looked down on the world and the domestic politics, and people were harmonious. A large part of the reason was that most of the imperial court and commandery officials were educated in the academy. An ordinary academy was already a giant, let alone the legendary second floor of the academy. The core disciples of the headmaster lived on the second floor. They rarely walked in the world and gradually became legendary figures. But when they appeared, they could be as weak as nobles and ministers. They could even stand up to the leaders of various sects and even the bigwigs of the Divine Hall. Who would have the courage to jump out and question such figures? Mo Shanshan once said to her fellow disciples at the hot spring by the blue sea that a false reputation was the most powerless thing. Strength always came from strength itself, just like ink and brush always came from ink and brush. So today in the tent, when arguing about the horse gang in the meadow, people's real feelings were biased towards the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. She was also famous, but standing opposite her was the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom, so no one believed or dared to believe it. At this time, the person who said the same words was Ning Quebec. Behind him stood the 2 unattainable peaks, the headmaster of the academy and the Tang Empire. So at this time, the most powerful person in the tent was him. Exclamations finally broke out. The people in the tent looked at Ning Ke and were so shocked that they didn't know what to say. They could only forcibly suppress their exclamations and exclamations. Then, all the sounds disappeared again. The tent returned to its previous state of silence, except for the sound of rapid breathing. For the cultivators of various sects, Ning Ke was definitely not an unfamiliar name, although he seemed to have directly entered the beautiful cultivation world of primordial qi in an unexpected manner this spring. Under the instruction of the great divine priest of the judicial department, the Divine Hall had been promoting his name. Therefore, all the followers of Hao Yin the world soon knew that there was a man named Ning Ke who had helped another legendary powerhouse kill a monk of the Yueluan Kingdom and a sword master of the South Jin Kingdom in one night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion in Chong City. Everyone in the world knew that this person named Ning Ke had defeated the dazzling and perfect Prince Long Qing in the competition on the second floor of the academy. What was even more shocking was that everyone knew that the name Ning Ke had appeared in the hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. Although no one had read the Tomes of Arcane, and many people had doubts about it, since the news was spread with the approval of the West Hill Divine Palace, it should not be false. He had just entered the second floor of the academy, become the successor of the Divine Talisman Master, and was qualified to write his name in the Tomes of Arcane. How could the young cultivators of various sects in the tent not be shocked, in awe, and in envy with such a shocking experience? Perhaps it was because of the old incident at the Spring Breeze Pavilion and the dead people in the old incident, But the eyes of the disciples of the Sword Garret of the South Gene Kingdom and the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yuelin Kingdom were filled with awe and envy, as well as some hostility. The most shocked people were actually the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. Catgirl blushed slightly and stared at Ninkei blankly. Her bright eyes were full of joy and disbelief. The girls covered their mouths tightly to prevent themselves from screaming out of shock. They had thought that Ninkei was just an ordinary student of the academy. They did not expect that he was the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Thinking of the time when they met in the hot spring and fought side by side in the wilderness, they could not believe their ears. When Mo Shanshan heard the name, she looked at Ninkei with a slightly stagnant look. Her hands, which were as steady as Shoshan, trembled a little. There was still no expression on her dull and slightly round cheeks, but a bit of fatigue suddenly appeared between her eyebrows. She put the small saber in her hand back to Zhuo Jihua's waist and sat back in the chair silently. Her lazy and listless eyes looked a little lost, and she did not look at Ninkei again. Ninkei did not notice the subtle change in the girl's mood at this time. After sitting down beside General Shu Cheng, he did not say anything more and just looked at the Revelation Department priest quietly. Because he did not look at Kunimati again, the noble aunt's expression became gloomier and gloomier. The Revelation Department priest also did not look at Kunimati. He looked at the snow-white silver hair floating in front of him and suddenly smiled. He quickly made a decision and looked at Ninkei and said, "Mr. 13, how do you think this matter should be dealt with?" Ninkei was slightly stunned when he heard the name Mr. 13. He thought that the bigwig of the Divine Hall had already known his identity in the frontier fortress of the north of Yin Kingdom. Then he thought of another thing and understood why. Once upon a time, there was a mountain, and there was an academy in the mountain. There was a headmaster in the academy, and he was the tallest person in the world. Perhaps this was just a saying to the people in the mortal world, but for the big shots in the cultivation world, especially those who knew a lot of historical secrets like the priest of the Divine Hall, it was an unquestionable truth. The headmaster of the academy was tall, of course, did not mean that he was tall. Although he was tall, it did not only refer to his high level of moral essays and ideology, but also to his high seniority. According to the childhood memories of the Hao-Ian hierarch lord and the elder of Lang Temple, the headmaster of the academy had lived for at least 100 years. According to the headmaster of the academy's self-deprecating words, the longer one lived, the more advantage one would have, such as seniority. Therefore, there was no one in the world who was of the same generation as the headmaster of the academy. Even those who were of the same generation as the headmaster of the academy's disciples were believed to have died. Therefore, when Master Yin Sei talked with second brother Jun Mo at the back of the mountain of the academy, there was a dispute over seniority. Therefore, when the bigwigs in the Divine Hall and the Buddhism sect mentioned those people at the back of the mountain of the academy, they never referred to them according to the seniority of the orthodox sections. The academy itself had this problem. The seniority gap between the front yard and the back of the mountain was too big. In order to avoid the indescribable embarrassment, it formed a habit of addressing them. The instructors of the front yard called those at the back of the mountain according to the order of seniority, such as Mr. First and Mr. Second. This habit gradually spread to the outside of the academy, but because the people at the back of the mountain basically did not show up in the world, probably only the bigwigs in the Divine Hall still remembered this rule. Therefore, Ninkei was Mr. 13, no matter in the military camp or in the world of cultivation powerhouses. Ninkei was not a typical Tangs, but he had been in the army since childhood. Although he was no longer a small soldier in the border town, he still retained a lot of the aura in this aspect. What he hated most in his life was the bastards who did not help their comrades and robbed military merits. In the Dongsheng Stockade village, he knew that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had robbed the military merits of the Blue Water Battalion. After entering the wilderness and experiencing the bloody battle, he did not have the slightest good impression of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Since they were Mr. 13, it was inevitable that he would have a 13th temperament. Therefore, even though he knew what answer the priest of the Revelation Department wanted to hear, he still did not follow the other party's instructions. The priest of the Revelation Department fell into silence. As an important figure in the Divine Hall, he naturally should protect the people in the Divine Hall. However, in recent years, the Judicial Department had two famous people, the Tao Addict and Long Qing, and its strength had rapidly expanded. In addition, the Light Department had to keep a low profile because of the secret matter, so the Judicial Department was extremely arrogant from top to bottom. As the priest of the Revelation Department, he had long been dissatisfied. Today, Ning Ke dared to guarantee the Academy's reputation as the Divine Hall, so he took advantage of the situation to protect the Divine Hall's bright and fair reputation. He was not afraid of being criticized for damaging the dignity of the Divine Hall, nor did he care about being blamed by the Tao Addict and other people. With his mindset, he looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "Chinbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, received 40 sticks and reported to the great divine priest of the Judicial Department to remove all of his positions. The cavalrymen will return to the Peach Mountain and be punished with hard labor for half a year. What do you think?" This punishment did not include Cuny Maddie, the flower addict, and the students of the Revelation Institute. But it was natural. Even the priest of the Revelation Department could not make any decision. Ning Ke knew that it was impossible to ask for more, so he nodded gently. Of course, he did not forget to praise the bright and righteous side of the Divine Hall. At this time, he was not reserved like a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. General Xu Cheng gently stroked his beard and also agreed. So this matter came to a final conclusion. During the discussion, no one asked for Cuny Maddie's opinion. Cuny Maddie, who was sitting next to the Revelation Department, had a gloomy face. Her dry hands holding the chair were trembling. Of course, she was not afraid of anything, but she was almost unable to suppress the anger in her heart. Hearing 40 sticks, Chunbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, instantly turned pale. The stick was a special punishment instrument inside the Divine Hall. It was made of black pine wood and wrapped with fine steel thorns. It was said that countless years ago, the first great divine priest of judgment carried this stick for 20 years before he understood the meaning of Haoyan. As a subordinate of the Judicial Department, he certainly knew this legend and how much pain this stick would bring to people. In the past few years, he had followed Prince Long Qing to patrol around, arresting the remnants of the devil's doctrine and heretics. He had personally whipped those evildoers with the stick. He had seen the blood blooming on their backs and the vines entwined with tendons. He had never thought that such a thing would happen to him one day. He was a master in the see-through realm and had an important position in the Judicial Department. However, the hierarchy of the Divine Hall was strict. Since the priest of the Revelation Department had made a decision, he did not dare to resist. He did not even dare to argue or protest. He could only clench his teeth tightly and obediently let the steward of the Divine Hall drag him out. Cultivators in the see-through realm were very powerful, but their bodies were no different from those of ordinary people. Soon after the heavy muffled sound outside the tent, Chinbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, finally could not help but let out a miserable howl. He wanted to clench his teeth and not cry out. He did not want to disgrace the Judicial Department. However, under the stick of the Judicial Department, even if he clenched his teeth, he could not resist the sharp pain. Everyone in the tent couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines as they listened to the muffled thuds of the cane landing heavily on their backs. They listened to the miserable howls and could even faintly hear the hissing sound of the thin steel wires hooking out of their flesh. Listening to these voices, the girls of the great river kingdom pursed their lips tightly. Thinking of their younger brother who died under the meadow, they finally felt a little better after many days of depression. They could not help but look at Ning Ke, who was not far away, their eyes full of gratitude. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 237. After Chinbachi was carried back from outside the tent, no one dared to believe that he was the previous commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, with a solemn expression and the blessing of light. It seemed that whether it was the emperor or the saint, as long as they were stripped naked and had countless pieces of flesh torn off from their backs by the thorn cane, they could only be miserable criminals. The priest of the Revelation Department glanced at the badly mutilated body on the carpet. His expression did not change at all. He spoke calmly and sternly. The main meaning was, of course, to reiterate the teachings of the Divine Hall. He warned everyone that Hao Ian's fair eyes were always patrolling the world, and those who dared to violate it would be punished. Ninkei did not listen to him carefully. It was not that he had any bad feelings for this bigwig of the Divine Hall, or that he wanted to express his strong contempt for hypocrisy. In his opinion, sometimes hypocrisy was also a virtue. The reason why he could not concentrate was that the man lying miserably on the carpet was staring at him. Shinbachi, who was bleeding like a river and his muscles were strands, raised his head with difficulty. He stared at Ninkei's eyes with his gray eyes without blinking. There was no emotion in his eyes, only indifference. However, it was this indifference that deeply showed his hatred for Ninkei at this time. As the commander of the Divine Hall's apologetic divine army and a powerhouse in the see-through realm, he had never been humiliated like this. He knew that he was not qualified to hate the Academy, and it was even more impossible for him to take revenge on the other party. But at the same time, he believed that the two priests in the judicial department, especially Prince Longqing, would definitely stand up for him in the future. Therefore, even though he was already in a daze from the pain and his eyes were a little blurred, he still stared at Ninkei because he wanted to remember this face and this person clearly. The matter of the horse gang on the meadow had been declared over with the severe punishment of the commander by the Divine Hall. Therefore, even if Chinbachi stared at Ninkei, Ninkei could not do anything. Ninkei could not be like those gangsters in the west city of Chong and then beat someone up just because the other party stared at him. However, Ninkei was not afraid of anything. He knew the hidden meaning in the indifferent eyes of the bloody man on the ground. So he slowly squatted down and stared back at him without hesitation. He said, "Commander, the way you stare at me makes me feel as if your eyes are piercing through me. It's a pity that you can't kill with just your gaze. You have to know that we were in the camp at that time, and we were the ones anxiously waiting for you on the meadow." Suddenly, he remembered that Master Yensei once described the real grand cultivators to him. For example, second brother only needed to glance at you and you would die. Then he thought that he had to rely on the waste token and the reputation of the academy and the headmaster of the academy to bully others. He could only rely on his power, but could not rise to power. He could not help but feel a little resentful. No one could sense Ninkei's resentful mood at this time. On the contrary, many people in the tent were resentful because of his appearance, especially when they saw the miserable situation of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall covered in blood and rotten flesh. Ninkei still lowered his body to continue to mock him. In the eyes of the disciples of various sects, he, a guy with fresh eyebrows and ordinary and amiable expression, was indescribably abominable. He was purely a scum who bullied others with his power. Aunt Cunimati could no longer suppress the anger in her heart. She slammed the arm of the chair heavily and snapped, "Enough." Ninkei stood up and looked at Cunimati. He shook his head and said with a smile, "Not enough." There was a tense silence in the tent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the young man with cute dimples on his cheeks when he smiled. They wished they could take a pair of scissors and pierce through his dimples. They thought that the Divine Hall had punished their subordinates, and they all remained silent. Wasn't that enough? When I walked into the tent, I stopped Hill Master from challenging you to a life-and-death fight. It was a little rash to interrupt. The reason why I did so was that I thought you were old and weak. If Hill Master made a mistake and hurt you, it would inevitably cause gossip. But I didn't think it was wrong for her to do so. Ninkei looked at the cold expression on the old woman's wrinkled face and the anger and contempt in her eyes. He thought of the scenes he had seen after he came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yin Kingdom. He thought of the despicable and shameless old woman who bullied others, framed others, and used her power and prestige to force the girls of the great river kingdom into danger. He frowned and said, "I just think we should ask first." When the grain team camp was besieged by the horse gang, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not move. "Aunt, you were also on the meadow at that time. Did you know that? If you knew, why didn't you do anything at that time?" Without waiting for his voice to spread, he quickly continued to ask. It was the Divine Hall who was punishing its subordinates. "Aunt, you said enough. Can you also interfere in the affairs of the Divine Hall? If you can, why didn't you do anything on the meadow that day?" Ninkei stared at Cunimati's old and slightly muddy eyes. His tone was extremely serious. Of course, he was not joking. His puzzled expression seemed gentle, and his words were neither fast nor slow, but his meaning was very tough. Aunt Maddie trembled with anger. She did not expect that after Commander Chinbachi had paid such a bloody price, this new disciple of the Academy's back mountain would completely disregard the seniority of the elders and even want to teach her a lesson. The priest of the Revelation Department frowned slightly. In his view, even if Ninkei was the core disciple of the headmaster of Academy and might represent the attitude of the Academy's back mountain, the Divine Hall had already expressed its harmony with the humiliation and blood of a powerhouse. If Ninkei really wanted to spread the flames of war to Aunt Maddie, it was something that the Divine Hall would never allow. The relationship between the Taoist power and the royal power of the Yueluan kingdom, Aunt Maddie's seniority and status in the cultivation world, and the power of the Buddhism sect behind her, meant that the Divine Hall had to protect her dignity. Therefore, the priest casually glanced in the direction of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. Both the headmaster of Academy and the students of the second floor of the Academy rarely walked around the world. But today, the cultivation sects in the world still held the Academy in great reverence, because there were many legends that began to circulate a long time ago. These legends were passed down from generation to generation in sects of various countries and formed a certain way of thinking. In addition to the beauty of distance, it was easy to produce a sense of awe. The world had not seen the headmaster of Academy or the back mountain for a long time, and it had become increasingly mysterious and profound. Now, they finally saw a disciple of the second floor of the Academy. But it was not surprising. He could not summon the wind when he opened his mouth, and could not summon the rain when he raised his hand. Instead, he was extremely proud and mean. The respect caused by the mysterious and profound naturally faded, especially the sword masters of South Jin Kingdom. They had the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, who was recognized as the strongest in the world. They were extremely proud and knew that this person called Ninkei was the culprit who killed his senior brother last year. It was more appropriate to say that they hated him rather than respect. Of course, the Revelation Department priest's glance did not mean that the sword master of South Jin Kingdom would jump out and kill Ning Quebec. The sword master of South Jin Kingdom would not do such a stupid thing. One only needed to think about the legend of Peach Mountain being cut empty to know that even if the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, was here in person, he would not offend the Academy for no reason. A sword master of South Jin Kingdom said in a low voice, "Mr. 13, you are not a member of the Divine Hall. What right do you have to care about the Divine Hall's affairs?" The priest's gaze and the sword master of South Jin Kingdom had no respect for Ninkei, only hatred. These factors combined into a question and rebuttal. Of course, under the premise that no one in the tent dared to question the Academy, this was considered brave. This sentence was naturally aimed at Ninkei's words to Aunt Maddie. Ninkei glanced at the sword master of South Jin Kingdom and shook his head, saying, "Are you an idiot?" As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he was stunned. Sang Sang had once asked him if he thought that everyone except himself was an idiot. He said that was because there were always many idiots doing idiotic things in the world. His favorite thing to do was to call countless people idiots in front of Sang Sang, such as the Tang Princess. He had once eavesdropped on the Tang Emperor calling people idiots in the imperial study, and he felt the warmth of a kindred spirit. He used to call Chun Pippi idiots on the letter paper, and he never got tired of it. It was just that, when he began to cultivate in the back mountain and gradually walked on the road to becoming a bigwig, he rarely had such a direct and straightforward way of doing things. That was why at this time he felt very familiar and missed the idiot ruler that he had not seen for a long time. He looked at the sword master of South Jin Kingdom and smiled. He continued in a gentle voice, "Are you an idiot? My master, Master Yensei, is the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace. He is on an equal footing with the three great divine priests of Revelation, Light, and Judgment. As his only successor, if I don't do anything when I see someone tarnishing the Divine Hall's reputation, wouldn't I disappoint my master's earnest teachings and let Hao Yin down?" At this time, most people would probably turn around and ask the Revelation Department priest, "Your Excellency, do you think I should do anything?" However, Ning Ke did not ask, because he knew that being arrogant and taking advantage of others was not a mistake. However, being too arrogant and taking advantage of others would only cause him more trouble. At present, the Revelation Department priest was obviously on an equal footing. He had been hunting in Min Mountain for many years, and he knew very well what to do when he encountered tigers and bears. Why would he do anything unnecessary? The Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom, who was full of courage and perseverance, was casually blocked by Ning Ke's words. No one in the field questioned whether he was qualified to care about the affairs of the Divine Hall. Although the whole world knew that the West Hill Divine Palace's confirmation of the two great divine priests of the South School of Haotian Taoism was only based on political considerations, if they questioned this matter at this time, wouldn't it be a slap in the face of the West Hill Divine Palace? Aunt Maddie's face was extremely dark. She stared at Ning Ke's eyes, and her body trembled slightly. Suddenly, she laughed hoarsely and unpleasantly and said sternly, "A woman does not serve two husbands, but a disciple has two masters. I won't ask Yin say, but if I meet the headmaster in the future, I will ask him what he is thinking. Is he going to ruin his century-old reputation for such a naughty, despicable, and shameless disciple?" Although he did not say it explicitly, the hidden meaning in his words was directed at the two masters. Although Ning Ke had not seen the headmaster of the academy, he had lived in the mountains for so many years. How could he allow anyone to be so presumptuous? Moreover, he knew that he could not punish this shameless old woman today. He was dissatisfied, but he could not do anything to her. He did not expect that she would come to him at this time. How could not give her a hard kick? Ning Ke's smile slowly disappeared, and he said calmly, "Previously you asked who my master was and said that you would teach me a lesson on behalf of my master. Now that you know who my master is, it seems that you still want to teach him a lesson." He slammed the table beside him heavily, and the table toppled over. The teacups were shaken away, and the tea splashed all over the sky. Ning Ke pointed at Maddie's nose, and his expression changed rapidly. He said angrily, "According to seniority, you, old woman, should call me Martial Uncle. How dare you teach me a lesson? Do you know what it means to respect the younger generation? Are you going to ask the headmaster? Is the headmaster someone like you can see whenever you want? You want to teach the headmaster a lesson? Do you want to deceive your master and destroy your ancestors?" When the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall stared at Ning Ke, he thought that this was the biggest humiliation he had ever suffered in his life. At this time, Maddie pointed at Ning Ke with a trembling finger, thinking that this was the humiliation she had never suffered in her life. However, just like the quiet court at this time, it only took the old woman a very short time to realize that there was no way for her to get back this humiliation today, because Ning Ke did not reason with her at all. Ning Ke was unreasonable. He only cared about seniority. As the sister of the Yueloan Kingdom's king, Maddie was extremely powerful, and her seniority in the Buddhism sect was indeed very high. In the past decades, whenever she met people who were weaker than her, she would use her strength to suppress them. When she met people who were more powerful, she would use her seniority to suppress them. In addition, everyone had to give her some face, so she was successful in every endeavor and gradually developed such a temperament. To put it in a good way, she abhorred evil, but in fact she was arrogant, cold, and narrow-minded. She never thought that someone would use this kind of means to deal with her, and she could only listen obediently, because according to her usual speech and behavior, the other party did not do anything wrong. The seniority of the headmaster of the academy was indeed very high. Even she, the old woman with the highest seniority in the Buddhism sect, was only 2 generations lower than him. This also meant that if strictly required, she really had to respectfully call Ning Ke uncle. She humiliated her uncle and questioned the Grandmaster. This seemed to be no different from deceiving the Grandmaster and destroying the Grandmaster's ancestors. Maddie was so angry that she was a little out of her mind. Vaguely, she seemed to see those peers who were suppressed by her seniority and dared not to raise their heads no matter how she scolded them. She thought to herself, "Am I going to suffer the same humiliation today?" She stared at Ning Ke, and her skinny old hands hanging outside her sleeves trembled violently. There was a strong fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth in the tent. Ninkei looked up at her condescendingly, with his hands behind his back calmly. There was no fluctuation of aura in his body. He did not need to say anything, and his meaning was clear. Hit me, hit me. Do you dare to kill me? If you really lost your mind and dare to hit me in front of so many people, I don't need to use eldest brother and his second brother to kill you. I only need to send the 12th brother, Chun Pippi, to take a look at you and beat you up. Well, it's because you're respected and has not yet entered the knowing destiny state. Ninkei looked at her and shook his head. He sighed and said, as a mighty person in the Buddhism sect, you don't even know how thin your life is. No wonder you are so old and have not entered the knowing destiny state until today. Although Kunimati was a member of the royal family, she was persistent in cultivation, noble in status, high in seniority, and powerful in strength. The most painful thing in her life was that she could not cross the high threshold. Under the continuous stimulation, she was about to lose her temper and was on the verge of exploding. But she knew that she could not fight with Ninkei here, so she had been forcibly suppressing it. But she still heard such a sentence at the end. Aunt Kunimati forcibly swallowed back the blood that was about to gush out of her dry lips. She used the last of her consciousness to make herself blacked out. No one knew whether it was true or not, and then she fell backward. There was an exclamation in the tent. Requesting recommendation votes on Monday. Please support me. Last week, I have been the first in the weekly recommendation. I hope I can continue to enjoy this comfort this week. Thank you very much. I can't repay you, so I will blow you a kiss. Mua mua. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 238. Whether it was true or not, Aunt Kunimati was not feeling well and had to be helped out of the tent by the disciples. As for whether it was the occasional cold or the anger attacking her heart, one could guess it from the eyes of the monks from the White Tower Temple of the Yuelan Kingdom. Ninkei looked at the weak back of the old woman without any sympathy. He thought to himself, even I have not seen the teacher. How dare you accuse the headmaster of the academy? What kind of fool are you? Thinking of the fool, he rolled his eyes and suddenly had the absurd idea of putting the big black umbrella on top of his head. He secretly thought that it seemed to make him more like second brother. Today's arrogance came from second brother's teachings. So although it was absurd, it was natural for him to have this association. From the legendary youngest uncle to second brother, senior brothers and sisters, and now Ninkei, the puppets of the academy were proud and arrogant. The people in the tent were shocked and angry before, but when they thought of the stories that had been circulating for a long time, they had to be silent. The academy had the right to be arrogant. If they were weak, they would be bullied even if they were not arrogant. If they were strong enough, no matter how arrogant they were, no one would dare to do anything to them, just like Kunimati. Because of these things that happened before, the agenda of the meeting became much simpler. Ninkei did not listen very carefully. When he reacted, the meeting in the Divine Hall had ended and most of the people in the tent had left. The priest of the Revelation Department smiled and went to rest. General Shu Cheng looked at Ninkei and said with a smile, although I also know it is good to stay with fresh girls, since our army has a camp here and you have revealed your identity, do you still want to go to the barracks of the Blackened Garden? It is not good for the imperial court. Look at what you said. Of course I will go with you. Ninkei was a little embarrassed by the general's teasing. He knew that in many people's eyes, there was something wrong with him, a disciple of the second floor of the academy, to disguise himself and follow a group of girls from the Great River Kingdom all the way north into the wilderness. The female disciples of the Black Ink Garden were still surprised and surprised. They wanted to come forward to talk to Ninkei, but thinking of his real identity, they did not dare to do so. Ninkei smiled at the girls and was about to say something. Unexpectedly, Mo Shanshan stood up silently and walked out of the tent without saying a word. He could not help but be stunned. Zhujiahua sighed in her heart and smiled apologetically to Ning Quebec. She pulled Catgirl, who was eager to move forward, and bowed to the Tang army with her junior sisters. Then she followed Mo Shanshan out. Ninkei couldn't help but touch his head, wondering what was wrong with the calligraphy addict. The Tang camp was quiet and the patrolling soldiers looked serious. Under the escort of several guards, Ning Ke and General Xu Chang walked slowly. No one dared to disturb them. The slightly cold winter wind blew the military flag above the camp. Ning Ke looked up and couldn't help but think of his life at the frontier fortress of the city of Wei. He missed it so much and was about to sigh with emotion. Unexpectedly, General Xu Chang looked back at him with a faint smile and said meaningfully, "The calligraphy addict is a good woman." Ning Ke knew that the general had indeed thought wrongly. He could not help but smile bitterly and was ready to defend himself. General Xu Chang shook his head and smiled. "Mr. 13, you don't have to say anything more. It is appropriate for the calligraphy addict to be a disciple of the back of the mountain of the academy. The Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom have been on good terms for generations. I believe that both the academy and His Majesty will be very satisfied with this marriage." Hearing this, Ning Ke suddenly understood why the general and the previous revelation priest looked so gentle when they said goodbye, as if they were matchmakers. With his current identity, it was no longer a purely private matter if he wanted to get married. At least he had to go through the imperial court and the academy. However, there were very few female disciples in the world who could match the identity of the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Of course, the calligraphy addict was the best candidate. Ning Ke did not know how to explain. He really admired the woman who was addicted to talisman and stood on the branch in a white robe and blue belt. However, this kind of thing, no matter what it was after all his own business. How could it become a matter for others to discuss? In order to resolve the awkwardness, he changed the topic and said, "I thought that the priest would protect the dignity of his divine hall no matter what. I didn't expect that he was fair." The Revelation Department is in charge of the Revelation Institute, but Prince Longqing's experience in the Revelation Institute was not very pleasant. General Xu Chang said, "So the relationship between the priest of the Revelation Department and Prince Longqing has always been a bit subtle. Especially in recent years, the Judicial Department has become more and more powerful. Prince Longqing has become famous, and the Revelation Department has been under a lot of pressure." Ning Ke said with emotion, "I see. I didn't expect that there would be so much secular strife in a place like the Divine Hall. The Divine Hall shines brightly in the world, but the resources it can control are not infinite. The three great divine priests each lead a side, and of course there is competition among them. However, these three great divine priests are above the great gods, so naturally they can't fight like secular hooligans. The real competition is between the three priests." General Xu Chang continued to explain, "Among the two bigwigs of the Judicial Department, the Tao addict is obsessed with Taoism and doesn't care about specific affairs. So the divine priests and deacons of the Judicial Department, the apologetic divine army and spies, are all specifically managed by Prince Longqing. If the Revelation Department wants to attack the arrogance of the Judicial Department, of course, the first target is Prince Longqing." He looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "In spring, you defeated Prince Longqing. In the eyes of many people in the Divine Hall, it was an unbearable humiliation, but the Revelation Department is probably grateful for your appearance." Ning Ke thought of the silver-haired priest of the Revelation Department and frowned slightly. He said, "How old is the priest of the Revelation Department this year? Is he stronger or weaker than Longqing?" If he could know this, he could roughly infer the true strength of the young powerhouses of the Divine Hall. The reason why he wanted to know this was that he always liked to see the Academy and the Divine Hall as opposite. The priest of the Revelation Department, Cheng Li Xue, should be over 30 this year. As for the cultivation state, General Xu Cheng shook his head and said, "Whether it is the military ministry or the Imperial Center Administration, they only have a rough estimate of the cultivation state of the people in the Divine Hall. Just like Prince Longqing, it is said that he is only one step away from the knowing destiny state, but no one knows how big that step is." Ning Ke stopped thinking about these issues and looked at a quiet tent in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "General, there is something I may need your help with." The disciples of the Black Ink Garden stepped on the withered winter grass and walked to their camp. Cat Girl looked at Ning K and the Tang general walking into the Tang camp. She reluctantly withdrew her gaze and frowned curiously. Teacher Zhong, no. The way Senior Brother Ning looked at Aunt Cuny Maddie just now was very strange. I don't know how to describe it. The girls thought of the previous scene. Aunt Cuny Maddie was trembling with anger and her face was dark. It seemed that she would go berserk at any time. But Ninkei stood in front of her with a gentle smile. He did not avoid her and even looked up at her. They also felt that the temperament and taste that he revealed at that time were somewhat inexplicable. Cat Girl bit her finger and thought for a long time. Suddenly she was enlightened and clapped her little hands excitedly. She looked at her senior sisters and said, I know, Senior Brother looked really cheap at that time. Hee, but I like it. The girls of the Great River Kingdom were collectively stunned. Then they found that the word cheap was indeed the best choice to describe Ning K's expression at that time. They could not help but cover their mouths and laugh, saying that they also liked his cheap look at that time. Only Emo Shanshan, who was at the forefront, did not laugh. There was no expression on her silent face. Zhuo Jihua looked at her expression and gradually stopped smiling, revealing a trace of worry. Back in the tent, Emo Shanshan seemed to have completely forgotten the fierce conflict in the tent and the previous scenes. She calmly poured water, ground the ink and the brush pen, sat in front of the table and began to prepare to write. Zhuo Jihua waved her sleeves to signal her junior sisters to leave temporarily. She walked to the table and sat down on one knee. She quietly looked at the expression on her white cheeks. After a long time, she softly said, Why did you leave like that before? Emo Shanshan's right hand holding the pen slightly stiffened. After a moment of silence, she said, Then how should I leave? She was the calligraphy addict, the hill master with the highest status in the Black Ink Garden at the foot of Mogan Mountain. She was also the last core disciple of the master of calligrapher, Lord Wang. But she was not old. In Zhuo Jihua's eyes, she was more like a younger sister who was obsessed with calligraphy and didn't know anything about the world. Zhuo Jihua quietly looked at her and softly said, Mr. 13 has helped us a lot along the way. If he didn't show up in the tent today, I'm afraid there would be more troubles in the Black Ink Garden. Even if we don't mention the friendship built these days, you should say goodbye to him just to express your gratitude. Emo Shanshan gently turned her wrist and the soft brush pen touched the yellow paper. She wrote a horizontal line and lightly said, I haven't said it before. In fact, those horse gangs came because of him. In this case, we have no reason to be grateful to him. On the contrary, he dragged us down. It's natural for him to speak in the tent today. Zhuo Jihua looked at the crooked horizontal line on the table and couldn't help laughing. She immediately sighed softly and said, You know that's not what I want to say. Emo Shanshan looked at the ugly handwriting like earthworms on the paper and felt a little annoyed. She looked back at her and said, Then what do you want to say? Zhuo Jihua looked at her dark eyes with a little annoyance and said with a smile, What I want to say is that since you have secretly liked Mr. Ning for such a long time, now that you see him in person, why don't you make it clear? Emo Shanshan was slightly stunned. She turned back and continued to write with her head down. She said, I don't know what nonsense you are talking about. Zhuo Jihua smiled and said no more. She walked out of the tent and left her alone to think. Emo Shanshan didn't think about anything because the thoughts in her mind had become a mess. She just held the brush, pen subconsciously, and kept writing. Her thin lips were slightly open, and she muttered to herself with annoyance, So you are that guy. But you have been hiding it from me. What do you want me to say? How can I be so cheap? As she muttered, the girl's eyes occasionally showed shame and annoyance. Her pink cheeks were slightly puffed and blushed. The ink on the yellow paper was dripping but tangled. Even when she was 3 years old, she couldn't write such ugly words. I had something to do yesterday. I'll make it up today. There's more. I'm writing slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 239. I am the 13th. Miss, you can call me 13. You also know talisman? A little. Senior Brother 13, you also know calligraphy? A little. Senior Brother 13, what do you think of this chicken soup calligraphy? The brush strokes of this post, are completely exposed and don't know how to restrain them. The form is scattered and the spirit is dead without a bone. It seems to have some new ideas, but in fact, it's just some cheap tricks. It's evil with ink techniques, and it's not worth mentioning. The conversations on the journey kept drilling into Mo Shanshan's mind, like the cold wind in the wilderness entering the tent. Her dull eyes became more and more confused, even a little absent-minded. He was the 13th in the academy. Who else could it be but him? Besides himself, who else in the Tang Empire would despise the chicken soup calligraphy and the flower-blooming calligraphy? And that night, he admitted that he knew a little about talisman Taoism. Why didn't I think that he was him? Shanshan, you should have guessed it long ago, right? Mo Shanshan looked at the piece of paper on the table that seemed to be scribbled by a child. She reached out and crumpled it into a ball. She was so ashamed and angry that she didn't want anyone to see it. But she didn't know whether it was because of the scribbling or her confused mind. But no matter what, she was really angry at this time. They traveled together on the long journey and even traveled together in the same carriage. But she didn't know that he was him. She even said that she liked him in front of him, although he didn't know that he was him, and she didn't know that the person she liked was the one in front of her. But now she finally knew that he was him. Everyone knew that the calligraphy addict was quiet and virtuous, but she did such a thing. How could she not be ashamed? If that guy knew the truth, how could she not be ashamed? Senior sister Zhuji Hua even asked her to explain. How could she not be ashamed and angry? Her trembling fingertips pulled out the well-preserved copy from the table. She looked at the words on the paper. Her long and sparse eyelashes gently blinked, as if trying to cover the blush on her white skin. In the spring, there was news from the Tang Empire that shocked Chang'an. She knew that there was a young calligrapher who was deeply loved by the Tang Emperor in a distant foreign country. Out of habit, she naturally ordered the deacons in the sect to collect some copies. Although there was no legendary flower blooming, she saw the rubbing of this chicken soup calligraphy. It was said that the young calligrapher was accepted as the successor of the divine talisman master because of the chicken soup calligraphy. As a disciple of the divine talisman master Wang Sage of calligrapher, she certainly knew how strict the requirements of the divine talisman master for the successor were. So she carefully studied this chicken soup calligraphy for a long time. Like Master Yin Sei, she didn't see the potential of the writer to be a divine talisman master. Nor did she cry like the girls in the House of Red Skirts because Master Yin Sei had scattered the meaning of the calligraphy. But she was not far from being a divine talisman master, so she could understand many meanings hidden in this chicken soup calligraphy. In addition, she also read many copies. She was proud, but she had to admit that the young calligrapher in Chang and was really good at writing. Except for her master, the master of calligrapher, there was no one else in the world who could be compared with him. When the details of the mountaineering competition on the second floor of the academy were spread to the great river kingdom, she was surprised to find that the young calligrapher had defeated Prince Longqing and became a student of the headmaster of the academy. She and the flower addict used to be good friends and often exchanged letters. So she was very clear that Prince Longqing was also a perfect person. But Prince Longqing actually lost to him, and even the headmaster of the academy accepted him as a student. So this person must be very good in terms of morality, bearing, and character. At this time, when she looked at the chicken soup calligraphy again, she found something different. It was a simple and sloppy note. Although the words and strokes were unorganized, there was a sense of great nature in it. It was so natural and open, as if Hao Ian's divine light had converged into a thunder in the clouds. The world should be like this. She was very curious about the situation under which the person could write such words. Because of some reasons, she used to firmly believe that it was stupid to judge people by their words. But in this spring, she couldn't help but gradually have some different feelings for the young man in the distant Chang and city because of these words. This feeling was not complicated, but very subtle, very clean, and as transparent as crystal. She had only seen the person's words, but not the person herself. However, people who practice calligraphy could have a similar mind. When she looked at the person's words, she seemed to see the person. When she looked at the words, the person seemed to be beside her. From spring to summer, she had been quietly looking at the person's calligraphy beside the ink pool at the foot of Mogan Mountain. The legendary ink pool was black, but in fact, it was clear and transparent, reflecting the stars in the sky and the girl's calm and smiling face. The person was behind her, looking at the calligraphy in her hand and her face reflected in the water. He did not speak and did not need to speak. He just quietly looked at the ink pool. Imo Shanshan looked at the rubbing of the chicken soup calligraphy. Her eyelashes slightly blinked, and the blush on her face gradually faded. The embarrassment in her eyes had already turned into confusion and uneasiness. Looking at the ink words for a long time, she whispered, "It turns out that you are you. Who is Sang Sang in the calligraphy?" "Young Master Sang Sang, I am drunk today. Is Sang Sang your little handmaiden? Has she been with you for many years? That's why you're so trusting, so natural, and so attached to her. Is this attachment out of habit or something else? Why didn't I hear you mention it on the trip? Yes, at that time you were still pretending to be someone else, so naturally you would not mention it. But Sang Sang, who is she?" Master Yin Sei could read Ning Kei's mind from the chicken soup calligraphy. The girls from the House of Red Sleeves could feel the warm fragrance of the bowl of chicken soup at home from the calligraphy. But she could feel the importance of the name Sang Sang to the calligrapher from the rubbing. At this moment, Zhuo Jihua lifted the curtain and came in. Seeing Ning Kei sitting beside the desk in a daze, she could not help but smile. This year, she often looked at the Hill Master in a daze beside the ink pool, so others did not know that she had feelings for someone that ordinary people could not understand, but she clearly knew. "Let's read it after dinner and then think about what to do," she joked. Because of her close relationship with Zhuo Jihua, her feelings were discovered by Zhuo Jihua. That was why Imo Shanshan was a little shy and annoyed when facing her. Because of the name at the beginning of the chicken soup calligraphy, Imo Shanshan was a little uneasy and confused. Suddenly hearing Zhuo Jihua's words, she could not help but feel more ashamed. She had never been ashamed in her life because she had never liked anyone. But now her feelings were exposed by her close senior sister. How could she not be ashamed? She held her slightly round pink cheeks with her hands, blinked her sparse eyelashes, and pursed her red and thin lips into a straight line. Looking at the pile of luggage that was carefully arranged in the corner of the tent, she suddenly said with slight annoyance, "Send these luggage to him." Zhuo Jihua smiled and said, "I don't have time." Imo Shanshan turned around and looked at Cat Girl who came in behind her. She said in a low voice, "Cat, you are familiar with that guy. Send his luggage to the Tang camp later." Cat Girl scratched her head in confusion and asked, "Why?" Senior brother said he would come back later. Imo Shanshan frowned slightly and said, "There's no need to ask so many questions. He is a Tang man and can't live here. Just send his luggage over and we'll be even." The thin rubbing of the chicken soup calligraphy was still on the desk, and the faint figure was still on the surface of the ink pool. The tacit understanding of fighting side by side for thousands of miles was still in her memory. How could they be even after returning the luggage? Intentions were not luggage. Because they had no weight, it was difficult to lift and put down. At this time, Ninkei did not know that the girl in white in the black ink garden tent was ashamed and annoyed. She was preparing to clear up those shameful emotions and memories that outsiders could not know. If he knew the truth of the matter, he would be so excited and nervous that he could not speak. Because although he was running away from the path of being a nobody, he did not have the consciousness of a big shot. The calligraphy addict secretly liked him? Damn it! What was the difference between this and Sister Butterfly liking him? Furthermore, it was Sister Butterfly who was dancing in tight panties. Because he did not know this, he was drinking tea and resting in a tent somewhere in the Tang camp. He looked very relaxed. After all, it was his own place. Both his mind and body could get a real rest under the protection of a sense of security. Unfortunately, he could not completely relax because he still had a very important thing to do. At dusk, a military order appeared in the Tang camp. General Xu Cheng gathered all the departments and announced the results of today's discussion in the Divine Hall. At the same time, they discussed specific matters for the attack on the Desolate Man tribe next spring. The order from the middle military tent was a little strange. The main force in charge of attacking the Desolate Man tribe should be completed by the elite cavalry of the Left King's Palace. Even if the northeast border military of the Tang Empire would also participate in the battle, it was not up to these officers to discuss the war with General Xu Cheng, because they were seriously not qualified. However, the military order of the Tang Empire was as important as a mountain. Although the cavalry station in the palace belonged to the northeast border military, since it was an order from the middle military tent, no one dared to disobey. With the dense footsteps, officers of all levels rushed to the middle military tent. The patrolling cavalry was also transferred, leaving only the defense force outside the camp. Ning Ke lifted the tent curtain and walked east in the empty camp. When he came to a place about 40 steps away from a tent, he stopped and reached behind him to pull out the big black umbrella that was tightly wrapped in cloth. The tent belonged to a deputy general of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. There was a very faint smell of herbs and blood coming from the tent. If it were not for his 5 senses after cultivation, he would not have been able to smell at all. After so many days, the bleeding has not completely stopped. I really don't know how you survived. Ning Ke thought silently in his heart. With a shake of his wrist, the big black umbrella opened with a swoosh. He held the big black umbrella and walked toward the tent. At this time, the twilight was like blood, but the cloud above the camp began to snow. The snow was very small and sparse. A few snowflakes fell on the greasy and dirty surface of the black umbrella. It was somewhat beautiful. The small snowflakes fell on the surface of the black umbrella without any sound, and the sturdy leather boots stepped on the withered yellow barnyard grass without any sound. Ning Ke held the black umbrella and walked into the tent of the deputy general. A flash of a knife chopped down. The knife was round and as bright as the wind and snow. It was a scimitar. The people in the tent knew that Ning Ke had come, so Ning Ke could not sneak an attack. Ning Ke knew that there were people in the tent, so the scimitar was not a sneak attack. The front of Ning Ke's robe suddenly swung up, and his right foot popped out like lightning. It fiercely stomped on the thigh of the sneak attacker. With a muffled sound, the body of the sneak attacker bent like a shrimp. The scimitar in his hand chopped through the air and fell heavily on the ground. With a clang, the slender padao was unsheathed and turned into a bright color. It gently swept across the throat of the man, and blood sprayed out wildly, all the way to the top of the tent. There was a strong wind coming from the right. Ning Ke did not turn his head. He held the big black umbrella with 2 fingers, and a fu paper suddenly turned invisible. An inexplicable feeling of dryness appeared in the tent. The sneak-attacking horse gang held the machete tightly in both hands and pounced on Ning Ke with the momentum of the forward charge. His speed was extremely fast, as if he was going to split the big black umbrella and cut Ning Ke into 2 halves from top to bottom. However, when he rushed to the back of the umbrella, he found that what he had pounced on was not the big black umbrella, but a blazing white sea of fire. The flames in the air of the tent suddenly burned out, but the flames on the head of the horse gang were still burning. The scimitar in his hand did not cut the umbrella, nor did it cut the person, but only the air. Ning Ke had already turned around and waited quietly at the side. He looked at the face of the horse gang and the fire that began to deform and melt. He looked at the last terrified look in his eyes and watched his mouth open wide, wanting to cry out in alarm. He lowered his body and waved his knife. The blade flashed, and the burning head flew into the tent. The blood that sprayed out from the neck cavity of the horse gang sprayed to the top of the tent again and mixed with the blood of his companions. Ning Ke held the umbrella in his left hand and the knife in his right hand and continued to walk silently into the tent. The headless corpse fell behind him with a thud. Under the umbrella, there was no emotion on his face. No matter in the past, present, or future, he had no mercy for these horse gang or those who pretended to be horse gang. The burning head of the horse gang rolled on the ground until it reached the inside of the tent. It stopped when it was about to reach a sleeping mat, and the flames with a burning smell gradually died out. A pale middle-aged man was lying on the sleeping mat. He was extremely thin and weak, and one of his shoulders was tightly bound with cloth. There was still some blood oozing out, and a faint smell of rotten flesh could be smelled. The middle-aged man stared at Ning Ke, who was gradually approaching. Suddenly, his eyes shone and his body trembled violently. He seemed to be in extreme pain, but he was extremely determined. The chi of heaven and earth in the tent suddenly became chaotic, and a gust of cold wind rose out of nowhere. The snowflakes on the big black umbrella were instantly blown away, but the vigorous psyche power condensed from decades of meditation and the determination at the last moment of life and death was completely blocked by the oily surface of the big black umbrella, like the gust of cold wind. None of it could pierce into Ning Kei's sense of perception. Since you have been ordered to kill me, you must be very clear about who I am. Ning Kei walked to the pale-faced, middle-aged man and looked down at him. He said calmly, I admit that your psyche power is indeed strong. But even if you are in perfect condition, how dare you hope to defeat a disciple of the second floor of the academy when I am prepared for it? Not to mention that you are now so seriously injured. Besides, do you feel that the wound on your broken arm is recovering very slowly? Even if you keep cutting off the rotten flesh, you still can't stop the wound from festering? In fact, that is because there is something on my knife. Ning Kei raised his right arm and stretched the padao to the middle-aged man's face. The padao shone coldly. Except for those complicated talisman patterns, there was nothing special about it. The person who instigated you to kill me and yourself knew that I was a student of the second floor of the academy and the successor of Master Yensei. So that day under the meadow, you blocked several of my killing moves. But it is a pity that you don't know two things about me. Ning Kei said, I have been hunting for a living since I was a child. I had to hunt big beasts when I was very young, so I occasionally use poison. My knife is smeared with snake thorn sap from Min Mountain. It is not very poisonous, but it is very troublesome. The middle-aged man lying on the mat was extremely pale. Because he had forced out the last accumulated psyche power in his sense of perception, he had no strength to fight back. Listening to Ning Kei's calm narration, his eyes subconsciously revealed an expression of fear. As a cultivation powerhouse, he really could not understand why Ning Kei, as a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, had hidden so many sinister and vicious tricks in addition to cultivation methods. I believe that you will no longer have any combat power at this time. But after all, you are a psyche master in the upper grade of the see-through state and a bigwig in the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. So I must remain vigilant. Then I am sorry. With these two words of apology, Ning Kei once again waved the padao in his hand. The knife light suddenly flashed and disappeared. The middle-aged man did not die, but there was another horrifying wound on his shoulder. His last remaining arm was also separated from his body. The middle-aged man turned with difficulty to look at his shoulder. After confirming that both his arms were broken, he could not help but feel disheartened. Then he felt an unbearable pain rush from his shoulder to his brain, and he could not help but let out a shrill scream. Ning Kei sheathed his knife and found a few pieces of old cloth in the tent. He stuffed one piece into the man's mouth and wrapped the rest around the wound on his shoulder. He was good at bandaging wounds, and with the addition of half a bottle of medicine, the bleeding quickly stopped. He lowered his head and seriously treated the middle-aged man's wound. At the same time, he said, I have said before that there are two things about me that you don't know. Apart from the one that I have said, there is another thing, which is that I have a flaw in my character. Although I have started to cultivate, I am still not a person beyond the world. So there are many things that I can't mention or let go of. For example, I will definitely take revenge for the fact that you wanted to kill me, and also why you wanted to kill me. Ning Kei finished bandaging and sat beside the middle-aged man. He took out the old cloth from his mouth and said, You will definitely not be able to mention anything in the future, so you have to learn to let go, such as those stupid things like loyalty. If he wanted to extort a confession by torture, there was no reason to cut off the other party's arm. But he did it, directly forcing the other party into a desperate situation, and then began to ask questions at this time. It seemed like a cold-blooded and unreasonable behavior, but in fact it was very reasonable. How could a strong cultivator's heart be broken if it was not for this kind of cold and clueless mental attack? The middle-aged man closed his eyes in pain. His dry lips were tightly pressed together, as if he was very afraid that once he opened his mouth, he would involuntarily say what Ning Kei wanted to know. Ning Kei looked at him calmly and said, There is no use pretending to be desperate. As long as you are alive, there is still hope. After all, you are still alive at this time. So there are some things that you have to explain. For example, who are you? I am suitable to write romance. I like to write romance. Who can pay a high price for me to write it? I am very satisfied with the writing of this chapter. There are still 2,000 words left. I will continue to write seriously. I want recommendation votes. Also, it is the end of the month. I want the monthly votes that I have not wanted for a long time. End of exclamation mark. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 240. In the middle military tent, General Xu Cheng was discussing with the officers of the Northeast Border Army. Suddenly, he felt the fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth from deep in the camp and heard the scream. His expression changed slightly. A deputy general's expression suddenly tensed up as he stood up and prepared to rush out of the tent. General Xu Cheng stared at him coldly and asked, "Su Yin, what do you want to do?" The deputy general called Su Yin turned around and looked at General Xu Cheng, who was as cold as steel. He finally understood why there was such a meeting today. He forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart and explained in a low voice, "There is movement in the camp. Maybe enemy spies have sneaked in. As the deputy general of the mountain battalion, I should go and check it out." "No need." General Xu Cheng's rank was far above Su Yin. He looked at him expressionlessly and said, "The imperial court is carrying out a task. You don't need to go and check." Su Yin felt as if he had been hit in the chest. He was worried about the situation over there and worried that if the imperial court was really investigating the horse gang, it might involve more people. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Why don't I know what the imperial court is investigating? And now we are deep in the wilderness. Will the imperial court send people to investigate?" General Xu Cheng slammed the table and shouted, "How dare you? Does the imperial court need to explain to a small deputy general? You shut up and sit down." The pale-faced, middle-aged man was the leader of the horse gang who had ambushed the grain team in the wilderness. He looked at Ning Kei's face with listless eyes and said weakly, "Since you can find me, why do you still ask who I am? I can find you because I have guessed your identity. But guesses are not valid after all." Ning Kei closed the big black umbrella and continued, "It doesn't matter who you are, and it is easy to find out. I just need to draw a picture for the military ministry to check." The middle-aged man frowned painfully and said, "Then you can check. I can't go back to Chong, and now that I am in the wilderness. And even if I find out who you are, it won't help me with what I want to know. It's like if I break the law of Tang Empire and kill people, no one would dare to say anything bad about the headmaster of the academy." The middle-aged man slowly closed his eyes and said, "My name is Lin Ling, the commander of the Imperial Northeast Border Army's Inner Vanguard Battalion." Ning Kei looked at his pale cheeks and repeated the name in his heart. Then he said, "Very well. Next, let's talk about who ordered you to kill me." The middle-aged man tightly pursed his dry, bloodless lips. It seemed that he wouldn't say another word. Since he was the general of the Inner Vanguard Battalion of the Northeast Border Army, then his immediate superior was General Xiaoho. In fact, Ning Kei did not need to ask, and the middle-aged man did not need to say. They both knew who wanted to kill Ning Quebec. However, inference could never be turned into evidence. As Ning Kei had said before, the Psyche Master Lin Ling admitted his identity because he knew it was nothing. Ning Kei looked at the middle-aged man, who had his lips tightly closed. He glanced outside the tent and saw a vague figure. After a moment of silence, he said seriously, "I swear by the headmaster's character that as long as you are willing to tell me who the mastermind is, I can let you go back alive and let the academy guarantee your safety." The Psyche Master Lin Ling opened his eyes and looked at him, but he still did not say a word. "I have already sworn by the headmaster's character. Do you still not believe me?" Ning Kei spread out his hands and said. Lin Ling said with difficulty, "No one ordered me. This is my own decision. Even if it is your own decision, it must have been tacitly approved by someone. You should know that although you are a powerhouse in the see-through state, you are still not qualified to command more than 600 horse gangs in the wilderness." Ning Kei looked into his eyes and said, "I want to know that person's name." Lin Ling gasped and said, "Is it really so important to hear that name from my mouth? It may not be important to the investigation of the imperial court." Ning Kei paused for a moment and said, "But it is very important to me." Lin Ling suddenly laughed. His pale smile looked a little strange. If it is very important to you, then why would I say it? Ninkei frowned and found that he had underestimated Xiaoho's prestige in his heart and his loyalty. He gently stroked his knees, and after a long silence, he suddenly asked, "Do you have parents or children?" Lin Ling seemed to have guessed what he wanted to say and said with difficulty with a smile, "No." In Ninkei's eyes, this smile was very hateful and proud. After a moment of silence, he continued to ask with a gentle expression, "Then as a cultivator, you must have a master or a sect, right?" Lin Ling answered, "Yes, but after I joined the army, I had little contact with the sect, and I have no feelings for it." "You are lying." Ninkei looked at him and said calmly, "If you have no feelings for the sect, you can let me have this empty door. But you are in a hurry to tear the sect apart, which proves that you have a strong intention to protect it." Lin Ling was slightly stunned and painfully frowned. He said, "Believe it or not, I won't say anything anyway." Ninkei smiled and said, "Well, whether you are lying or not, you have to know what kind of crime it is to collude with the horse gangs to attack the grain team, especially to murder a disciple of the second floor of the academy." Lin Ling said calmly with a firm expression, "It is just death. Who doesn't die throughout the ages? Of course, it is not as simple as death. Although I think that death is indeed the biggest threat, I know that loyal people like you have always thought that there are things in the world that are more important than life and death." Ninkei looked into his eyes and said, "I'm a disciple of the headmaster of the academy and a trusted official of His Majesty. Based on this matter, I can punish your master and elders, disband your sect, and even kill all your relatives and fellow disciples. Maybe you really don't care about their lives, but what if your childhood sweetheart is among them? What if there's a senior sister who tucked you into bed at night? Wouldn't it be a pity if she died like this?" Lin Ling did not understand childhood sweetheart, but he understood Ning Kei's undisguised killing intent. So his body, which was cold due to excessive blood loss, became colder and colder, as if it was more miserable than the wind and snow outside the tent. "I am not used to threatening people like this, because I rarely have the capital to threaten people before," Ning Kei said very seriously, "and I don't want to threaten people. I just want to know an answer. I both know this, but I want to hear the answer from your mouth." Lin Ling's skinny cheeks revealed a struggling expression, and his gray eyes gradually overflowed with feelings of abandonment and guilt. Ninkei looked carefully and calmly added, "I swear by the headmaster's character." After a long time, the dying psyche master finally slowly uttered a dry syllable from his dry lips. Ninkei lowered his head and listened quietly, asking a few questions from time to time. After hearing everything he wanted to know, he stood up and looked at the dying middle-aged man, whose eyes showed some calmness and relief besides guilt. He nodded to show his respect. Then he pulled out the padao from the sheath and chopped down, and the cold blade cut the man's throat. The psyche master's complex emotions, such as guilt, relief, and fear, all turned into gray shock and despair. His eyes were wide open, and he could not close them even if he was not breathing. Walking out of the tent, Ninkei looked at the Tang soldier who was waiting for him and said, "It's really a pity that he didn't make it." This Tang soldier, who was an informant of the Imperial Center Administration in the Border Army, had seen what happened today from the beginning to the end. Hearing this, he did not know how to respond at all. Looking at the residual blood on Ning Kei's blade, he could only remain silent. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 241. Without breathing and unable to close her eyes, she died with everlasting regret. Ninkei did not close Lin Ling's eyelids in the tent, so he did not feel heavy in his heart. He even quickly forgot about it after he left the tent. He had killed too many people in his life and seen too many dead people. He had also seen many people who died with their eyes wide open, so he didn't care at all. The resentment of the dead wanted revenge. If he could turn into a ghost, come on. Ninkei never forgave those who tried to kill him. As long as he could achieve his goal, any oath or promise was the least valuable thing. He did not swear on his own character, but on the headmaster's character, because his character was not as valuable as the headmaster's. As for the headmaster's character being ruined because of his actions anyway, the headmaster didn't know. Ignorance is not my fault. If others knew the truth, they would probably think that Ning-Ke was immoral. For example, the spy from the Imperial Center Administration beside him looked nervous and uneasy. No one knew what he was thinking, because they did not know Ning-Ke's nickname in the city of Wei, immoral. Ning-Ke was such a person. But since he left the frontier fortress and returned to Chang, and with Sang Sang, he had no chance to show his wicked side, no matter how magnificent or bloody the things he had encountered and seen. The remaining leaders and leaders of the horse gang who attacked the grain team and tried to assassinate him were all dead. The middle military tent of the Tang army also went smoothly without any accident. This group of cavalry belonged to the Northeast Border Army, but General Xu Cheng had come under the emperor's orders. As the commander of the cavalry, Deputy General Su Yin, who was suspected of harboring the horse bandits, had no way to resist and obediently allowed himself to be captured. General Xu Cheng revealed Ning-Ke's identity to investigate the horse gang case, which was one of the important reasons for suppressing the officers and soldiers in the camp. But the more important reason was the discipline of the Tang army. Although the Tang Northeast Border Military had been under the command of General Xiahou for many years, it was still the army of the empire, not Xiahou's private army. Nowadays, the Tang Empire was powerful, and the people from all over the world were loyal to the emperor. The idea of being loyal to the emperor was deeply rooted in the bones of every proud soldier. The people in Chang and never worried that there would be any heresy in the four border armies. In the central military tent, Ning-Ke told General Xu Cheng about the previous situation. Then, he selected some of the secrets that Lin Ling had told him and asked the general's personal guards to record them into a book. They would send them back to Chang, and later. As for the spy from the Imperial Center Administration, he had already returned to his tent. There was another secret memorial, which would be sent to the nation advisor through the Imperial Center Administration, and then directly sent to the Imperial Palace. Therefore, Ning-Ke was not worried that the horse gang case would disappear without a trace. At this time, he was more worried about something else. Why did Xiahou want to kill him? Even if Lin Ling suspected that he was involved in the case of the censor and acted on his own, this reason was not strong enough. As a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy and a trusted official of the emperor, Lin Ling would have to take a great risk to kill him. If there was no motivation or inducement, why would Lin Ling cause trouble for his master? General Xu Cheng looked at him thoughtfully and thought that he was thinking about something else. He said slowly, although Lin Ling is a great psyche master of the Northeast Border Military, this matter may not be able to be deduced to the general. After all, there's only one confession, and it was not recorded on the spot. Mr. 13, I am only responsible for reporting this matter back to Chang'an. Ning-Ke smiled to show that he understood. Even if his current status was extremely noble, this noble status belonged to the back of the mountain of the academy and was not deeply involved with the secular world. It was really delusional to want the imperial court to punish a general of the army with just one sentence. Under the complicated gazes of the people in the military camp, he walked out of the central military tent and walked to his own tent. He had only taken a few steps when he saw a small figure running over from outside the fence. Catgirl's little face was slightly red. She panted and waved her hand, saying, "Senior brother, your luggage is too heavy. I really can't carry it alone. Do you want to carry it yourself?" Ning-Ke had originally wanted to move back to the Tang camp. After all, this was the place of his own people. However, today he had killed several horse gang members from the inner vanguard battalion of the Northeast Border Military, which led to the arrest of the highest officer of this troop. Although no one dared to show any disrespect or hostility to him, the complex emotions in those eyes really gave him a headache. No need to move. He stretched out his hand through the fence and rubbed the little girl's head. He said with a smile, "I will go back to sleep at night." Catgirl was overjoyed. She clapped her hands and said, "That's great. Senior sisters all said that you would not come back." After the identity of the disciple of the second floor of the academy was exposed, the girls of Black Ink Garden thought that Ning-Ke had no reason to stay with them anymore. he would definitely move back to the Tang camp. Perhaps it would be difficult to see him again. Thinking of the mutual support along the way, the jokes, and the wild goats that were roasted golden, they could not help but feel a little regretful and sad. Therefore, when Ninkei appeared outside the tent with the big black horse, he was warmly welcomed by the girls. Even the big black horse was touched by the soft and fragrant hands of the girls. It gently shook its head, kicked the hard ground under its feet, and turned its thick lips from time to time, looking particularly proud and happy. Only the calligraphy addict, Emo Shan Shan, was as indifferent as before, or even more indifferent. Ninkei walked into the tent and saw that she was writing small, regular script with her head down. He said a few words to her, but got no response. He could not help but feel a little strange. He walked forward to see what she was writing, but she glared at him coldly and stopped him. "I won't be angry with you for the sake of your poor eyesight." Ninkei unconsciously comforted himself. He walked out of the tent and came to the side of the big black horse. He took out something that looked like a dry grass root and stuffed it into the big black horse's mouth. The big black horse's eyes suddenly brightened. It chewed and swallowed it down. Then it lowered its head and rubbed Ninkei's face like a puppy, as if it wanted to ask for more. However, because its body was too big, it looked ridiculous even if it wanted to snuggle up to Ninkei, not to mention that it was like a little bird leaning against a man. Ninkei was too lazy to care about it. He annoyedly pushed its head away and looked into the distance covered by the dense clouds in the north. That was where the desolate man was. I couldn't help but look at that place quietly. I understood something. Many people were heading there. The imperial court and the academy did not send anyone there. He was the imperial court and the academy. Xiaohe wanted to do something there and did not want the imperial court and the academy to interfere or know about it. That was why he did not hesitate to take a great risk to kill Ninkei, because he was willing to fight to the death for that matter. In the desolate and cold wilderness, what could be worth the Jinjuan general's fight to the death? Of course it was that tome of arcane. Ninkei looked at the north of the wilderness and smiled. It started with the tome of arcane, and it seemed that it would end with the tome of arcane. But he did not know if there was a good-looking vixen among the forces fighting for the tome of arcane. "I like your black horse." A voice suddenly came from behind. Ninkei turned around and looked at the beautiful girl in white beside the big black horse. He looked at her red lips that were pursed into a straight line and her black hair that was neatly combed. He felt that there was a pause in the sentence he heard before, but he thought that he had heard it wrong, because her expression was still so dull and her eyes were still so beautiful. But there was no charm or shyness in them. She was no different from usual. "There are only 2,000 words today because the outline has been used up. I have to go and work on the latter part of the outline. I hope I can understand it as soon as possible. It also happens to be the confession day that happens once every 4 years. It is said that the girls confess today and cannot be rejected. So I have to confess to each other. It will be March soon. Please vote for the guaranteed monthly votes. I will not write a single chapter. If there are not enough votes, it will not be too late to write a chapter. Good night." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 242. Looking at the young female talisman master in front of him, Ninkei said after a long time, "I like her too." The big black horse grinned and showed his white pebbled teeth after receiving a series of confessions, especially when its master expressed his love for her. Emo Shanshan glanced at the big black horse and asked, "Why did you come back?" Ninkei glanced at the direction of the Tang camp and said, "I went to deal with some things. I'm used to staying here." Emo Shanshan's expression softened a little as the word used was more pleasant to hear. She gently tucked her hair behind her ears and looked at him and said, "I will continue to go north with the divine hall the day after tomorrow. What are your plans?" Ninkei did not listen carefully to the second half of the meeting. At that time, the priest of the Revelation Department relayed the letter from the Hierarch Lord. In the letter, the Hierarch Lord asked the powerhouses of the younger generation to sneak into the northern wilderness tribe in the middle of winter to find out their strength and find the remnants of the devil's doctrine. They could even carry out some purges if necessary. These were, of course, nominal statements. In fact, The Divine Hall also wanted to test and hone the disciples of various sects through this trip. Although they had not fought for more than 1,000 years, the Divine Hall knew that the strength of the Desolate Man tribe was still strong. Otherwise, the elite cavalry of the Left King's palace would not be beaten so miserably. In order to avoid the situation of sacrificing in vain, the requirements for this batch of young cultivators to go north were extremely strict. They must be powerhouses above the see-through realm. As a leading figure of the younger generation, Emo Shanshan was naturally among them. "Are you going to the north?" Ninkei frowned slightly and looked at the beautiful face of the girl in front of him. Thinking of the conflict between the Black Ink Garden and the Divine Hall these days, he could not help but worry and asked, "Who else is going?" Emo Shanshan's answer was as concise and clear as ever, or it could be said that she did not know why. Of course, those people. Ninkei smiled bitterly and thought that everyone thought that he was a disciple of the second floor of the academy, so he must know the strength of the cultivators of various sects in the world. The problem was that he really did not know who those people were. Emo Shanshan looked at his expression and thought that he was thinking about something else. She said, "Prince Longqing has not appeared. I think he should be in the north now." Ninkei shook his head and said, "Don't believe what they say. I don't want to compete with that prince for everything. I don't want to be the enemy of a lifetime." Then he thought of the powerful figure that Shin Pippi once mentioned. He felt a little curious and asked Emo Shanshan, "I have met 2 of the 3 addicts in the world. What kind of person is the Tao addict? Will she appear when you go to the Beihuang region?" "I haven't seen the Tao addict, and I don't know if she has come to the wilderness. As for Prince Longqing, you're indeed no match for him now, so I won't misunderstand that you want to challenge him." Emo Shanshan said, "Besides, you don't like to be compared with Prince Longqing, and I don't like to be called one of the 3 addicts in the world. But I can tell you clearly that the Tao addict, Yi Hong Yu, is addicted to cultivation, so her state is definitely above Longqing's. Longqing is stronger than me, so she is the strongest among the 3 of us." Ninkei looked at her slightly flickering eyelashes and said, "Before becoming a divine talisman master, talisman cultivators like us will always be at a disadvantage when competing with people of the same state. You don't have to worry too much about it." Emo Shanshan looked at him with a puzzled look and asked, "Don't have to worry too much about what?" Ninkei was startled and said, "Don't worry too much about it. The Tao addict is stronger than you." Emo Shanshan shook her head and said, "There are always people stronger than you in the world. Why do you care?" Dusk had arrived early and the sky was dark. The cold wind on the wilderness blew the girl's face. Her long and sparse eyelashes gently blinked, and her expression was calm and tranquil, without a trace of reluctance. Ninkei looked at her for a long time and felt a little emotional about the girl's state of mind. However, he had been floating in the stinking ditch for too many years, and every pore of his was filled with the smell of money and thirst. He really could not understand this kind of quiet mentality. Just like the porters on the dock, they could not understand that some pedantic literati would rather starve to death than write some articles. Even if he could understand a little, he did not know how to express his appreciation. "I will also go there." He raised his arm and pointed to the dense wilderness in the distance in the north. Emo Shanshan frowned and asked, "Why?" "The Edict of the Divine Hall has no binding force on you." Ninkei looked at the end of the wilderness and said, after a moment of silence, "I want to find something, or to stop others from finding that thing. I don't have to do this. Even yesterday, I was still thinking about whether I should leave or not. But today, I find it is still worth doing." Emo Shanshan's expression gradually became dull, and she asked, "Why?" Ninkei looked at her and said with a smile, "Because this is no longer just a matter of the imperial court or the academy. It is also my personal matter." Emo Shanshan looked back at him quietly. She looked at his profile under the last touch of twilight and looked at his shallow dimples. She suddenly said, "Those horse gangs who specially came to kill you should know your identity as an academy disciple." Ninkei nodded. Emo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and said, "But they dare to kill you." In the same way, in the meeting tent, no matter how you provoke and ridicule Kunimati, or even disrespect the Divine Hall, no one dares to do anything to you in front of so many people. But if you go into the depths of the wilderness, where there are few people, anyone can kill you. As long as your body is buried in the snow, who will know who the murderer is? Ninkei shook his head and said, I am not that easy to kill. Mo Shanshan looked up at him and said, although you are a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, your strength is too weak and your state is too low. The desolate man is strong, and the people who go to the desolate man's tribe to investigate are at least above the see-through state. That is to say, anyone can beat you like a dog. How hard is it to kill you? When she said this, the girl's eyes were as casual as usual and her expression was as dull and calm as usual. She did not deliberately show any sarcasm or ridicule. However, it was precisely because of this that it showed that she was very serious when she said this. She said the most honest words. The more honest a person was, the more hurtful his honest words were. So Ninkei was hurt and hurt his self-esteem. His fiery heart in his slightly stiff body was pierced by the calligraphy addict's words and dripped with blood. It was as if she had cultivated a more powerful means than the divine talisman. Every word from her lips could cut him. In his opinion, when the grain team was attacked, if it were not for the calligraphy addict who insisted on dying with the soldiers of the Yen kingdom, he would have escaped by himself. Even the psyche master of the Northeast border military could not do anything to him. He did not expect that in the eyes of the calligraphy addict, he was still such a weak guy. Can anyone beat me up like a dog? Ninkei stared at Mo Shanshan's beautiful round face with his eyes wide open. He forcibly suppressed the shame and the smell of blood in his heart and said angrily, do you want to try first? I still have a lot of skills that I haven't used. If you really push me too far, be careful that you don't beat me like a dog. My dog will bite you first. Hearing this extremely indecent words, Mo Shanshan was angry and ashamed. Her cheeks were slightly red. Ninkei stared at her face, which gradually exuded a red flush, and instantly forgot his previous shame and anger. He curiously asked, didn't you say that the disciples of the Black Ink Garden don't like to wear rouge? When did you start to wear it? Mo Shanshan became more and more ashamed and angry, but this time she was ashamed and angry. She did not want to pay attention to this guy anymore. She gently flicked her sleeves and turned to walk into the tent. Ninkei looked at the girl's back and was stunned. He quickened his pace to catch up with her and shouted, don't leave in a hurry. There are still some things that I haven't explained clearly. You have to listen to me. Mo Shanshan stopped and did not look back. She indifferently said, what's the matter? Ninkei turned to her and very solemnly bowed with hands folded in front. Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned. Ninkei said with a shy face, I want to discuss something with you, Hill Master. Mo Shanshan looked at his cheeky face and thought of the face reflected on the calm surface of the ink lake in summer. She could not connect it with the face and felt a little depressed. She whispered, what's the matter? I've been very clear about danger since I was very young. Ninkei stopped smiling and said, very solemnly, the Divine Hall did not ask all sect to send see-through state masters to enter the desolate man's tribe together. Since it's an investigation, of course, secrecy is the first priority. That means you can go by yourself. In that case, I wonder if the two of us can go together? Wasn't enough to not only go together, but also sleep in the same room during the long journey? You still want to go together? What exactly do you want to do? Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him, who was very close to her. She suddenly felt that she did not know where to put her hands. She asked with a very slight tremble in her voice, why? If we go to the desolate man's tribe together, even if we really meet the legendary elder of the Devil's Doctrine, we have a higher chance of survival if we cooperate with each other. The most important thing is that if we go together, we can perfectly solve the danger of people from the Divine Hall or those Baldies from the Ueluan Kingdom. The more Ninkei thought about it, the more he felt that his idea was appropriate. He waved his arms excitedly and said, if we meet the Tao addict, Yi Hong Yu, or someone even stronger than her, we definitely can't beat her. Then you can hold the Tao addict, and I will escape on the big black horse. As long as I can escape, I will be a witness. How would the Tao addict dare to kill you? Suddenly, he noticed that Mo Shanshan's face had become a little pale. Her usually casual and straight eyes had become extremely sharp, and indistinct flames of anger could be seen in them. Ninkei thought that she might have misunderstood and hurriedly explained. The opposite is also true. I can hold the powerful enemy, and you can escape first. Then the enemy will not dare to kill me, the core disciple of the headmaster of academy. In other words, it is just a little game of you and me being witnesses. I don't want to use you as a gecko's tail. Hope and disappointment followed one after another. Especially this kind of subtle and slightly sour expectation involving the spring breeze would make every young girl feel ashamed and annoyed. Although Emo Shanshan was not an ordinary girl, she was a girl after all. Just like Ninkei, although he was not ordinary shameless, he was shameless after all. Emo Shanshan stared into his eyes. The burning flames in her eyes were about to burn up the legendary calligraphy addict's virtuous and quiet aura. Then they gradually converged and turned into indifference and indifference. She said slowly, "You only want to escape when you meet a powerful enemy. Don't you think that it is too cowardly and shameless?" There was undisguised contempt and displeasure in her calm and indifferent words. Although Ninkei was used to the indifference and calmness of a young talisman master along the way, it was different from contempt. He was also a little annoyed and said, "I will be beaten like a dead dog if I say it. Can't I escape?" Emo Shanshan looked at the natural expression on his face and thought, "How dare you express your dissatisfaction?" Her hands in the sleeves trembled slightly, as if they would clench into fists and punch out at any time. She stared at him for a long time, as if she was studying an inkstone, as if she wanted to see clearly whether this was a precious Huangzhou clay inkstone or a cheap and worthless one. After a long time, the girl looked at him and asked disappointedly, "Headmaster of Academy, how could he accept a person like you as a student?" Ninkei spread out his hands and answered honestly, "Because the headmaster of Academy himself doesn't know that he has a student like me. Sometimes I also wonder whether he will regret if he knows that I am such a person." Looking at his sincere look, Emo Shanshan didn't know what to say at all. Only then did she realize that her previous view was correct. It was a very stupid thing to judge a person by his words. Reality and imagination were two different things. She had been psychologically prepared for this. However, as the contact went deeper, she still couldn't understand how a person who could write those sections could be so shameless. Why was there such a big difference between the real him and the one on the surface of the ink lake? "Come here," Emo Shanshan suddenly said. She walked to the side of the table and spread out a roll of Xianzhou bud paper. Ninkei didn't know what she meant. He walked over and sat down. Looking at the thickness of the yellowish paper and the dense flocculation on it, he loudly praised, "Good paper. I have only seen such good paper in the imperial study of His Majesty." Emo Shanshan didn't pay attention to his flattery. She expressionlessly poured water into the inkstone and gently lifted the ink block to grind for a moment. Then she pointed at the brushes on the brush rack that looked like door curtains and said, "Pick one yourself." Ninkei vaguely guessed what she wanted him to do. He couldn't help feeling a little nervous. After a moment of silence, he very seriously picked a purple brush that he was most used to and began to adjust his breathing. Sure enough, Emo Shanshan expressionlessly said, "Right." There was no reason or reason in front of it. It was just a single word, simple, clear, and direct. Ninkei honestly asked, "Write what?" After a moment of silence, Emo Shanshan said, "Just write a note." Ninkei shook his head and said, "I don't need to leave a message for anyone at this time. Why would I write that?" As his voice fell, he finished adjusting his breathing. After a moment of concentration, he slightly moved his wrist, and the full tip of the brush dipped in ink fell on the Xianzhou bud paper. He was now a famous calligrapher in Chong and City. However, the girl in front of him was the world-famous calligraphy addict. He didn't dare to neglect her. On the contrary, he had to show his best skills to show his respect. It didn't take long for him to raise the brush and turn his wrist. A cursive script had been completed. The strength was vigorous and the changes were endless. As it flew around, it seemed to be stagnant and steep. Ninkei put down the brush and looked at it for a moment. He was very satisfied. Then he looked at Emo Shanshan and felt a little anxious. He didn't know if she was satisfied. Mo Shanshan turned to the opposite side of the table and squeezed him to the side. She lowered her head and looked at the ink paper for a long time. She didn't show any emotion on her face or in her eyes. Looking at the flying ink on the paper, the girl thought silently that it was indeed an expensive Huangzhou mud inkstone. Her own inkstone was the Huangzhou mud inkstone. The dusk had faded and the night had come. A few lights were lit in the tent. The dim light shone on Ning Kei's side face and clearly reflected his strange expression of uneasiness and confidence. Mo Shanshan looked at his side face and suddenly thought of the side face by the window on the journey. She thought of the dark and vicious young man in the carriage who taught her how to kill. She gradually understood something. Whether it was an expensive Huangzhou mud inkstone or a cheap one, as long as it could be used to write good characters, it was a good inkstone. At that time, he was also himself and also worthy of being liked. Otherwise, why did she rush to say that she had someone she liked when he said he liked her a little? Mo Shanshan understood her mind and couldn't help bowing her head shyly, revealing a silent smile. Under the dim light, this smile was so beautiful that it couldn't be described. But when her eyes fell on the scribbled paper, the smile on her face became a little faint. She thought to herself that although the words were good, it was a pity that they were not the words she wanted. She did not want a large piece of paper. What she wanted was a small note. "When are you going to write me a note? I like your characters." Mo Shanshan looked up at Ning Kei and said calmly. There was no pause or unnaturalness in the sentence. At midnight, in a corner of the tent, the young talisman master held the paper and looked at it quietly. No one knew what she was thinking. Cat Girl looked at it and frowned. Her bright eyes were full of dissatisfaction. She said indignantly, "There are so many unfaithful men in the world. I didn't expect Senior Brother Ning to be such a person." Zhu Jihua was slightly stunned and thought that she really shouldn't tell those things to this little girl. She said with a smile, "Mr. 13 doesn't know Hill Master's affection for him. How can he be unfaithful?" Cat Girl stuffed the milk slice into her mouth and chewed hard. She snorted and said, "Heartless is even worse." Zhu Jihua said with a smile, "Don't be meddlesome. Hill Master is not a vulgar woman who dares not to speak." The cold wind was blowing and the snow was falling. It was a long way to go. They should take a rest first. Deep in the wilderness, they were close to the desolate man's tribe. Heaven and earth were already pure white. Occasionally, they could see a few trees and some hoofprints left by beasts. Just before entering the snowfield, Ning Kei got the last piece of information from the Imperial Center Administration and the Secret Guards. It confirmed that the caravan that came out of Tuyang City didn't stay in the palace for too long. It should have turned north from the mountain pass in front and then went somewhere unknown. He picked up a branch and drew a map and his route on the snow. "Write a few words for me to see." Mo Shanshan took off her snow-covered hat and looked at him calmly. Ning Kei said painfully, "I've written all the way. We are about to see the desolate man. Do you still want to write?" Mo Shanshan pointed to the flat snowfield in front of her and said, "Hurry up. I like to see your words." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 243. They left the palace and headed north again. Ning Kei's route was very clear, which was to follow the caravan that came out of Tuyang City. However, when they came to this snow pass, the intelligence from the Imperial Center Administration and the Secret Guards had been cut off. They had to explore the rest of the way by themselves. Fortunately, they were very careful along the way. They always kept the Tianchi Mountains clearly visible on their left regardless of the gloomy and snowy weather. Even if they could not catch up with the caravan, it was not a problem for them to go back the way they came. It was unclear whether it was his handwriting or her shameless spirit, but Mo Shanshan did not go with the powerhouses of the Divine Hall. Instead, she went north with him. It was a lonely journey. The two often learned from each other about calligraphy and talisman Taoism, and they both gained something. Ning Kei, in particular, mastered more basic skills of talisman Taoism through her demonstration, and even vaguely felt that he was about to break the realm. He could not help but feel happy. Mo Shanshan was also in a good mood. Just as she said, she liked to see Ning Kei's handwriting. During the journey, She could see Ning Ke drawing on the snow and mud with an ink brush or a branch on a piece of paper every time they stopped to rest. Even the boring and monotonous journey seemed to be enriched, and the snow was like a pool of ink. The rustling sound of the branch in the snow sounded. Ning Ke looked at his handwriting and nodded with satisfaction. He found that under the pressure of Mo Shan Shan, not only had his cultivation state improved, but his calligraphy had also improved a lot. Mo Shan Shan pulled the scarf in front of her chest or shoulder, slightly leaned forward, and looked at his handwriting carefully with her head down. She stretched out her right index finger and slowly gestured in the air, as if she was copying. Ning Ke knew that the girl's eyesight was not good, and he was used to her concentration and posture every time she read. At the bottom of the mountain pass, a gust of cold wind mixed with snowflakes blew, causing the scarf on the girl's shoulder to flutter. Her black hair fluttered backwards, contrasting with her slightly red face, making her look very beautiful. Behind the snow dome, the big black horse held its head high and kicked its front hooves in boredom. No one knew what it ate all day long, but it was so hot that it did not seem to be afraid of the cold here at all. There was a maroon mare next to it, with a warm cloth quilt and a cloth band on its hooves, but it still seemed to be a little afraid of the cold. It kept getting close to the big black horse, carefully rubbing against it, as if it wanted to keep warm but did not want to annoy it. The big black horse snorted softly and seemed a little tired, but did not move its tall body, but stood upright in the wind and snow, blocking the snow wind blowing from the right side for the maroon mare. Mo Shan Shan's fingers in the air slowly stopped and finished copying, but she did not raise her head. Instead, she continued to read the words on the snow, as if she wanted to keep them in mind. Ning Ke reached out to take off the black mask on his face and asked seriously, "Yesterday, I asked you about breaking the realm. You said that everyone's situation is different, and the higher you go, the more difficult it is. But I just entered see-through from no doubt state, which is not a difficult juncture to break the realm. Why is there no movement after such a long time from Dongsheng Stockade Village to here?" Mo Shan Shan straightened up, looked at him, and said quietly, "You just began to understand in spring, and now you have seen the front gate of see-through in less than a year. If you're not lying, then it can only mean that you are a genius in cultivation, which also explains why the headmaster of Academy chose you as a student." Ning Ke asked, "You mean that I'm already very great compared with others?" Mo Shan Shan's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she asked, "Who are the others you're talking about?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Prince Long Qing." Mo Shan Shan looked at him and said seriously, "Didn't you say that you don't accept such a cliché as a lifelong enemy?" Ning Ke laughed and said, "The world says that Prince Long Qing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. If he really enters the knowing destiny state, I can't be cliché even if I want to," and his smile gradually disappeared, and he said calmly, "The Divine Hall will respect the Academy, but it doesn't mean that they are afraid of the Academy. Especially for people like Prince Long Qing, he will definitely find a chance to defeat or even kill me personally, so as to perfect his so-called Taoist heart. If he enters the knowing destiny state, he can really beat me like a dog." Mo Shan Shan looked at him quietly, as if looking at the wind and snow outside the snow cave, and guessed what he was thinking. After a long silence, she said softly, "Do you want to defeat him? Pride and confidence come from strength, and I am not second brother." Ning Ke said, "So I don't expect to defeat him now, but I think that if it is possible to delay his steps into the knowing destiny state, maybe I can catch up with him one day. I think you should have time, although not enough time." Mo Shan Shan looked at him, and a rare smile appeared on her usually expressionless face. The smile was a little awkward, but it was full of gratification, warmth, and encouragement. Among the 5 states of cultivation, the end state is the most difficult. It is very difficult to enter the knowing destiny state. Although I can write half divine talisman now, it is only a lucky chance that I got. I still can't see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. Mo Shan Shan looked at him and continued, "Although Prince Long Qing is recognized as the most likely to enter the knowing destiny state among the younger generation, I think he just saw the threshold, and there is still some time before he can cross it. A few days ago, I was thinking that the Divine Hall let us enter the wilderness because of this consideration. Ninkei suddenly thought of something, and he frowned and asked, "You once said that Longqing is not as good as the Tao addict. If Longqing has seen the threshold of the knowing destiny state, then what about the Tao addict? Maybe she has crossed one foot? Maybe she just saw the threshold." Mo Shanshan said, "The strength of the Tao addict lies not only in her state of cultivation, but also in her exquisite mastery of Taoism. It is said that the hierarch of the Divine Hall once praised her for being proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods. You can imagine it." Ninkei was shocked when he heard the words proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods. When he was about to ask more specific questions, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and stretched out his arm to hold the big black umbrella behind him. A very weak arrow sounded in the wind and snow outside the pass. Although Mo Shanshan was not as sensitive to the sound of arrows as Ninkei, as a cultivator in the upper see-through state, she found the speed of the arrow not a little slow. Her exposed fingers moved slightly outside her sleeves and pinched a piece of fu paper. Ninkei reached out to stop her because he heard the direction of the arrow, and it should have nothing to do with them. An arrow deeply shot into the gentle slope outside the snow dome. A snow rabbit hiding in the snow slope had its buttocks torn apart by the arrowhead. It struggled with all its might and jumped into the mountain pass. The snow rabbit fell into the snow dome and died after a few bounces. The words written by Ninkei on the snow ground were trampled into a mess. Heavy footsteps sounded on the snow slope outside the pass. Ninkei used his eyes to signal Mo Shanshan to let him handle this matter. He released the handle of the umbrella from his back and held the hilt of the knife. A person in an animal skin cotton coat climbed over the edge of the snow dome and looked for the injured snow rabbit. He first saw 2 horses, and then saw Ninkei and Mo Shanshan. He could not help but be shocked, and drew his bow and arrow to aim at the two. Ninkei frowned slightly and looked at the short bow in the person's hands. He noticed that the bow material was a little special, and the twisted wire in the bowstring shone slightly. It seemed that it was not made of animal tendons. Then he noticed that a few strands of long hair floated out from the edge of the person's hat. Looking at the face carefully, it turned out to be a woman in her 30s. He held the hilt of the knife, looked at the woman calmly, and said, "We mean no harm." Mo Shanshan looked at him and did not understand what he wanted to do. Although she could already confirm that the woman was just an ordinary person, shouldn't she be more careful in a place so close to the desolate man's tribe? The woman looked a little surprised when she heard Ninkei's words. She hurriedly took 2 steps back and stepped on the edge of the snow dome. Only when she was far enough away from Ninkei did she seem a little relieved. She asked, "You're from the Central Plains?" Her accent was a little strange. The tip of her tongue rarely moved, and the time between each word was very precise, which made her sound straight and tough. But these 3 words were still understandable. Ninkei looked at the woman and asked seriously, "Desolate man?" The woman did not answer his question, but looked at the 2 warily. She pulled the short bow tighter in her hands, making a slight deformation sound, as if an arrow would be shot at any time. She continued to ask, "You're from the Central Plains?" Mo Shanshan was not good at lying, and there was no need to lie in this situation. She answered expressionlessly, "I'm from the Great River Kingdom." The woman shook her head and said, "I've never heard of you." Mo Shanshan pointed at Ninkei and said, "He is a Tang. I think you should have heard of him." Ninkei thought that this was bad. 1,000 years ago, it was the Tang Empire that drove the desolate men to the cold region of the far north. The hatred between the 2 sides was as deep as the sea. How could this desolate woman not get mad when she knew that he was a Tang? He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword and prepared to kill the woman before she could make her move. Unexpectedly, when the woman heard the word Tang, she was only slightly startled. She did not have any intense reaction. Instead, she calmed down and said, "I've heard of the Tang." Ninkei frowned and asked, "Have you heard of it?" "Yes." The woman said in her unique accent, "Everyone in the tribe knows that we moved away many years ago because our ancestors couldn't defeat you." Ninkei was even more confused and asked, "Then why aren't you angry when you know I'm a Tang?" The woman put away her bow and arrow and said expressionlessly, "If you can't win, you should admit defeat. What's there to be angry about? Ning-Ke scratched his head and said, it seems that makes sense. This was the first time that Ning-Ke and Mo Shanshan had seen the Desolate Men. Through a short contact and conversation, they found that the Desolate Men were not the rumored monsters that could eat stones and drink molten iron. They were like them, who needed a hunt, could talk, wore clothes, and ran around every day to make a living. They could not be more ordinary. The Desolate Woman no longer paid attention to them. She pulled out the arrow from a snow rabbit and carefully observed the wear and tear of the arrowhead. Then she grabbed a snowball and wiped the blood off the rabbit. She then threw it into the bag behind her. Mo Shanshan looked at her quietly and suddenly asked, why did you come to the south? It was Ning-Ke's turn to look at her. He came to the wilderness occupied by the Desolate Men for a very clear purpose. It was not for the Divine Hall, nor for the peace of the countries in the Central Plains. He was going to find the Tomes of Arcane. Of course, he did not want to deal with these Desolate Men. The Desolate Woman glanced at her and said, why can't we come? Mo Shanshan said, this is someone else's place. The woman said, many years ago, this was our hometown. But after we left, it was occupied by those barbarians. Why can't we come back? Mo Shanshan looked at her and asked seriously, but the grassland barbarians have lived here for so many years. They have lived here for generations. Now that you have occupied their land, how can they survive? Ning-Ke looked at her and thought to himself, although you are a cultivation genius, how can you ask such an idiotic question? The Desolate Woman looked at Mo Shanshan as if she was looking at an idiot and said, if we don't take it back, how can we survive? Ning-Ke burst out laughing. Mo Shanshan glanced at him expressionlessly. Then she led the maroon horse and followed the Desolate Woman across the edge of the snow dome to walk down the gentle slope. Ning-Ke was stunned and hurried to keep up. The big black horse was stunned for a long time and found that no one paid attention to it. They all ran away. It angrily kicked the snow and carried the heavy luggage to keep up with them. After talking for a while, Ning-Ke felt that the Desolate were really interesting, especially their temperament was very similar to that of the Tangs. But he was still not ready to contact the Desolate. He did not expect that Mo Shanshan seemed to have a different idea. Mo Shanshan looked at the Desolate Woman walking in front of her with a bow on her back and said softly, we will fight with the Desolate next spring. Of course, we need to know the real situation of the Desolate tribe. The Divine Hall asked us to investigate the enemy, and this Desolate Woman does not suspect us. Isn't this the best opportunity? Ning-Ke shook his head and thought that the Divine Hall wanted to fight with the Desolate. What did it have to do with him? However, since Mo Shanshan insisted on taking this encounter as a part of her mortal world trial, he could not object. After walking out of the snow dome and turning east for a short distance, he saw a lonely tent. The surface of the tent was painted with a black mud-like paint. It seemed to be able to keep out the wind and cold. However, it was obviously far from the settlement of the Desolate Man tribe. He did not know why the Desolate Man woman lived here. The Desolate Woman did not invite them to be a guest, but she did not show obvious hostility to them either. She let them follow into the tent, threw them a large piece of jerky without enthusiasm, and poured them 2 bowls of hot water. There was not too much salt in the jerky. Although it was tasteless when chewed, it would emit a rough original fragrance if mixed with saliva for a long time. Since Ning-Ke left the city of Wei, he rarely had a chance to touch such things. He could not help chewing with relish and did not have time to talk at all. Mo Shanshan thanked the Desolate Woman and tore 2 pieces of meat into her mouth and chewed slowly. Looking at her expression, it was not clear whether it tasted bad or good. The Desolate Woman lowered her head to deal with a piece of animal skin and ignored them. Although there was no face-to-face in the tent, it was silent. Ning-Ke felt the strange atmosphere and could not help but look up at Mo Shanshan. He thought that she did not say that she wanted to investigate the enemy and check the real situation of the Desolate tribe. Could it be that she could speak when she was mute? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 244. Mo Shanshan glanced at him. She was confused and even a little flustered. Obviously, She was not good at it even though she was the world-famous calligraphy addict. Ninkei held back his laughter, glanced at the dried meat in his hand, and began to chat with the desolate woman. He was very good at chatting. Since he was a child, he could survive in such a dangerous environment. In addition to being ruthless, the most important characteristic of him was to please others. Generals of the city of Wei, His Majesty, Master Yensei, and senior sister professor by the east window liked him. Who didn't like him? Therefore, it didn't take long for the desolate woman to start chatting with him warmly. Although her accent was a little weird, there was no problem communicating when they slowed down the speed of their conversation. There are a lot of fish in the hot sea, all kinds of fish. The desolate woman grabbed a handful of hay and wiped off the blood on her hands. She spread her arms and said, "My man has seen such a long fish." But speaking of delicious, every year during the Right to Light, the tribe leader will send warriors to dive into the sea to catch the female fish. That kind of fish is really delicious. Ninkei put the dried meat in his hand aside and asked curiously, "Female fish?" "Well, because the fish eggs are very big, we call them female fish." The desolate woman stretched out her fingers and gestured exaggeratedly. Then she shook her head and said, "After coming to the south, there are more sheep than before, but it's not so convenient to eat fish." From the conversation, Ninkei learned that the desolate men went down from the hot sea in the cold region in spring and robbed a large grassland of the palace. Before winter, they had stored enough food and even kept a lot of sheep. But probably based on tradition, the tribe still sent the desolate men to hunt everywhere. The cold wind hit the tent with snowflakes. Because of the strange pain on the outside, it made a dull sound. Ninkei thought of what he had seen along the way and was puzzled. He asked, "Even if it's hunting, it doesn't make sense to come to such a remote place. It's not safe to be too far from the tribe." He had been hunting in Min Mountain since he was a child, so he was very clear about the hidden dangers of hunting far from the tribe. The desolate woman said, "This is the rule of the tribe. During the winter ceremony, you have to live alone for the whole winter." Ninkei asked curiously, "What is the winter ceremony?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. Mo Shanshan, who had been sitting quietly beside him, also looked at the door. The heavy curtain was lifted, and a short figure rushed in, shouting joyfully, "I'm back." It was a skinny little boy carrying a fat badger on his shoulder. His face was full of joy and pride, but when he saw Ninkei and Mo Shanshan, he suddenly became vigilant. "It's a guest." The desolate woman stepped forward and took the prey on his shoulder. She gently pulled it with her fingertips and quickly blocked the cold badger's bleeding wound. She smiled and patted the little boy's head. Ninkei looked at the little boy, who was definitely no more than 12 years old. He could not help but feel shocked that he could hunt such a big winter badger in such cold weather. Then he thought of his life in Min Mountain when he was younger than the boy many years ago, and could not help but feel a little emotional. "This is my son." The desolate woman looked at the surprised expressions of the two people from the Central Plains and laughed heartily. She said, "The winter ceremony you mentioned just now is his winter ceremony. According to the tribe rule, in the winter of the year, when he is 12 years old, parents will accompany the child to the mountains to hunt. Before the North Hot Sea thaws, the child will be considered an adult if he can hunt half a cart of prey." She looked at the little boy sternly, but could not hide the tenderness in her eyes. She said, "Next year, he will become a warrior and then have his own family. So the winter ceremony is the last time we accompany him." The desolate would become a warrior at the age of 12? Ninkei had not yet gotten rid of the shock. Then he thought of the previous sentence about having a family and could not help but say enviously, "We Tangs can't get married so early." Hearing the word Tangs, the desolate boy, who was already a little vigilant, suddenly became more nervous. He subconsciously wanted to hide behind his mother, but thinking that he was going to become a warrior of the tribe during the winter ceremony, he forcibly plucked up his courage to stand in front of his mother and stared at Ninkei fiercely. The desolate woman slapped him hard on the back of the head and scolded him sternly. "What's the big deal about having a fat badger? The winter ceremony needs half a cart of prey. It's okay if it's a small cart like the one in my hometown. But didn't you see the cart pushed by a man in autumn?" The cart used by those barbarians is so big. It's not so easy to fill half a cart. The little desolate boy was driven out of the tent by his mother with sticks and intimidation. He carried a wooden bow and arrows on his back, and once again began the difficult hunting activities that he needed to become a desolate warrior. Ninkei listened to the desolate woman's previous judgment about the small cart in his hometown and the big cart of the barbarians. He could not help but laugh happily. The desolate woman lowered her head and continued her work. She took a smooth piece of wood and kept rolling the fur under her feet. From time to time, she raised her arm to wipe the sweat on her forehead. Ninkei thought of the prey covered by snow outside the tent and thought that this kind of work was really hard. He asked, "Sister, where's the child's father?" "He died in the battle with those barbarians in spring." The desolate woman did not raise her head. Her tone did not change. It was still flat and stiff, as if she was telling a story that had happened a long time ago and had nothing to do with her. It was even a story that was about to fade away. Suddenly, she raised her head and stared at Ning Quebec. She asked, "You will the Tangs come and fight us?" "Probably not." Ninkei looked at the expression on the woman's face and said in a serious tone, "Definitely not." Whether the Tang Empire would send an army to fight against the desolate was a decision that could only be made by the emperor and the ministers in the court. How could he know whether they would or not? But no matter whether they would or not, he could only say no in front of the desolate. And he had to say it firmly and decisively. Mo Shanshan did not say anything and just glanced at him again. The desolate woman was stunned after hearing his answer. She showed a rare smile and said, "That's good." Mo Shanshan looked at her quietly and suddenly asked, "Even if the Tangs don't come, there are many other countries in the Central Plains, especially the Divine Hall. Aren't you worried?" The desolate woman leaned forward and put her weight on the piece of wood. She pressed hard on the animal's skin and murmured, "As long as the Tangs don't come, what's there to worry about?" As night fell, the wind and snow outside the tent stopped. The little desolate boy came back. But this time he looked a little ashamed because his hands and shoulders were empty. The desolate woman did not say anything. She boiled a pot of hot soup and stewed a leg of lamb from somewhere under the snow. She added some spicy seasoning, and the four of them ate in silence. "You can only stay here for one night." The desolate woman put away the boning knife and looked at Ning Quebec. She added, "Because this is the rule of the winter ceremony." Ninkei expressed his gratitude and walked out of the tent with Mo Shanshan. The two walked toward a snow slope not far away. At this time, the snow outside the tent had stopped and the clouds had dispersed. The high dark night sky was dotted with countless stars. The starlight sprinkled on the snow covering the wilderness and hills, reflecting a faint blue light. From Chang, into the wilderness, I heard some stories about the desolate men from the academy on the way. Ninkei breathed the cold and fresh air outside the tent and looked at the faint silhouette of the withered trees in the distance. He said, "Do you know why the wilderness is called the wilderness?" Mo Shanshan had lived in the southern Great River Kingdom for a long time and was very unfamiliar with this territory. She could not help frowning slightly when she heard his question. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Isn't it because this wilderness is very desolate? There are endless green grasslands and all kinds of beautiful lakes. There are evergreen forests in the majestic Tianchi Mountain, and countless beasts live here. How can this place be considered desolate?" Ninkei looked at her profile and said with a smile, "The wilderness is not desolate. The reason why it is called the wilderness is that this beautiful wilderness belongs to the desolate men." Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and asked, "What do you want to say?" "Nothing." Ninkei said, "Just now in the tent, you looked at me a lot. What did you want to say at that time?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, "I want to remind you that these people are the desolate men and are our enemies. You are trying to find out the enemy's situation and deliberately befriend them, but be careful not to forget your position." Ninkei laughed. After a pause, he looked at her and said, "What position should I stand on?" Mo Shanshan said expressionlessly, "The remnants of the devil's doctrine are of course the enemy." Ninkei looked at her and asked in confusion, "I have always wanted to know why the devil's doctrine is the enemy." Without waiting for Mo Shanshan to answer, He continued, I have thought about it. The devil's doctrine is only different from Haoyan Taoism in terms of cultivation. It is at most a branch of the divine hall. How can it become the embodiment of evil? Mo Shanshan frowned in silence and stared at his eyes as if she had seen something very strange. She said with sadness and sympathy, don't let others hear you talk like this in the future, and don't let me hear it. Ninkei found that the girl's expression did not seem to be joking, and he could not help but be slightly stunned. After a long time, he stepped on a withered branch into the snow with the sole of his shoe and said calmly, in the past, you have been meditating by the Ink Lake and have not experienced much of the world. Now that you have seen so many ugly things and the performance of the people of the Divine Hall on the meadow, do you still have a heart of reverence for the Divine Hall? Mo Shanshan looked at the night sky above her head and blinked her eyes. She had difficulty focusing her eyes and looked a little lost. After a while, she said softly, even if I don't respect the Divine Hall, I still have to respect Haoyan. Ninkei followed her gaze and shook his head. He said, reverence is really meaningless. Mo Shanshan looked back at him and said seriously, but the evil deeds of the devil's doctrine are always true. Yesterday's activity was more tiring than writing 10,000 words. My cervical vertebra was seriously injured. I wrote this late yesterday and posted it on time. Today I will go out for personal affairs. I hope it will be smooth and fast, and I will go home soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.